Hold on, that is such a genius thing to do, is to have your like bio stuff on your camera in both ways. That way, no matter what stream you go on to, if it's mirrored, you're still good to go. I never
Bro,
thought of doing that.
brother, I am trying. I am such a Luddite. It's like all the jokes about lawyers and technology are 100% accurate. Even getting the basics going is dramatic for me. But piece by piece, I'm starting to figure out how to do this tech. But man,
All right, awesome.
it's good. It's good to meet you. I don't know if you saw these, but in the last couple weeks, I had these conversations from which I needed a palate cleanser. I did the
I've seen clips, but I haven't like gone through the content because like I mean shit, I'm doing political streaming. When I'm done doing my, quote unquote kind of job, or at least this part of my this part of what I do for work, right? And I'm relaxing. I don't want to fucking watch a Destiny stream. You know what I mean? Like it's like I already did that 20 hours this week. Like I don't want to fucking like that's not like I want to go watch Kill Tony or an anime or like listen to an audiobook or something. So like I'll watch clips or whatever, but if I'm not watching it on stream, I probably didn't watch the full thing. But I heard about some of it.
and totally fine, man. And it's funny too because like obviously like Destiny's super combative. Those are going to be explosive conversations. I don't mind that. Like that actually doesn't bother me at all. The thing that kind of got to me is I had a really kind of chill stream with Wick where I was debating the shrimp welfare project. And there's these utilitarians, right? And they're fucking saying if you got $1, it's good to donate to alleviate shrimp suffering. Now, this is not a hypo, right? I mean, these people actually have $1 and they're donating to that charity instead of a charity that like gives water to people in Africa or like, some other charity that helps people.
Non-Fawn's like big thing is the Shrimp
Yeah.
Welfare
I
Project,
love
which is the
non-farm, but
most retarded charity I've ever heard of in my entire fucking life.
well, that
Like there are charities that are a waste of money. What is happening to my what the fuck? Sorry, my YouTube was doing something weird. There are charities that are a waste of money. This is like I can't like you might as well just burn your money in your hand at that point.
well, this is your brain on utilitarianism, right? Where you do some kind of weird math problem, and that says, I think the guy I was debating said, if he had the choice between 400 shrimp being stabbed non-fatally or one human being stabbed non-fatally, and he was at the trolley switch, he would pick saving the shrimp because saving 400 shrimp from being stabbed is better than saving one person from being stabbed. And I mean
Let
that
me pause real quick, guys. For those of you that don't know, Non-Fawn, the guy with like the little baby wrists, that was on the last Prime Guys yesterday, he is heavily invested in a charity organization that I'm assuming he's getting some money from. Maybe it's just a passion project. I don't fucking know. But it is a charity organization to use a new method of killing farm raised shrimp with like electrocuting them so that they die a quicker and less painful death to alleviate via the utilitarian calculus suffering in the world, by not stabbing or killing shrimp in a way that their eyes bulge, et cetera, et cetera. And that is what we are talking about here. And Non-Fawn would rather 400 shrimp, be saved from the train of non-fatality than a human being non-fatally stabbed.
And the reason I bring it up is because then I debated Econo Boy, not on the practicality of socialism, but on the morality of socialism. And at one point, he said to me, what was his hypo? He was like, let's say you had to give up property rights, but as a result, everyone in society was 10 times wealthier. Would you do it? And I said, it's an obvious no, because I'm not a utilitarian. I'm not trying to calculate how things are going to go in a hypothetical world. When you ask me what's moral and what's immoral, I ask myself, are people's natural rights being abridged? Are you taking away what it means to be a free human? And if you are, then you shouldn't do that. And your kind of hypothetical question is not going to change my mind on that. And
Someone someone just DM'd me a paper for the stream, and it's just, should we sacrifice the utilitarians first? Saul Smilansky. Fucking, I love my chat sometimes, guys. It's
that's a
so nice
solid
having
paper.
a just like a group of autistic anarcho-capitalist objectivists and like liberty-minded, people.
Yeah.
They fucking, I love it. That's a great paper.
That's hilarious. But yeah, that's what
All right,
got me
lightning
thinking
round.
that we should talk, because I was like, holy shit, there's something that's happening where people are being taught this kind of utilitarian morality, and it
Mhm.
feeds directly into the socialist pipeline. Because then you say, if you're a utilitarian and someone says, are you going to trade essential liberty for theoretical comfort? Your answer is probably yes, because you're a utilitarian, right? Like
Right.
it's baked in to the utilitarianism that that utopian socialism would be appealing, at least as a
All right,
thought
so let's
experiment.
start. Let's start from a foundation first,
Yeah,
right? Let's structure this conversation. So the first thing I want to ask is, where are you coming from philosophically? How would you describe yourself ideologically? Like political ideology and like philosophically.
sure. I'm well. This is going to be a kind of a little bit of a winding story, but I'm a disaffected Democrat. So I've historically always voted left. And
Mhm.
then two things happened roughly simultaneously. I went to law school, and I was exposed to principled libertarian, conservative, originalist thought for the first time. Because in my bubble, you never saw the actual authors, right?
Congratulations, chat. We have found the first lawyer that went to law school and became more right wing from law school. In case you
Yeah.
guys are wondering, critical race theory did not start as critical race theory. Obviously, it started as critical theory. We can go all the way back to Marxism. We can go all the way back to Plato if we fucking want to, or Kant if that's where you want to start. But, okay, it started as critical legal studies and then morphed into critical race theory. So that CRT shit that was all the rage a few years ago that you hate so much, that shit started in law school. That is, law is the most woke portion of colleges out of anything. Sociology, gender studies, women's studies is less woke than going to law school. So fucking kudos to this man for being forced, for professors that were forced to show him some originalist thought and forced to show him some shit, and then became right wing.
Well, I mean, I don't know how sane people can read Justice Scalia's dissent in Obergefell, which is, if you guys haven't read it, it's one of the greatest pieces of legal writing. But what he just lays out is that the central question always is who rules you, not what the right is, not what the case, who has the power to rule you. And should it be nine judges, or should it be the consent of the people? And his point was merely that, which is that,
Neither.
yeah, well,
Both are wrong.
we can get into that in a second. So anyway, we don't need to derail into originalism. And at the same time, the Democratic Party kind of lost its mind. So by the time that all percolated, I became politically homeless. And then in terms of like philosophy, I'm a natural rights theorist. So, my morality is based on the premise that what the founders wrote in our Declaration of Independence is right, that there are certain
So
inalienable rights.
you're a classical liberal,
Yeah,
essentially.
for sure. And I think that that's, to your point, the measure of a just government isn't whether it's even a democracy. The measure is whether or not our natural rights are being honored, which in theory could be honored by any form of government. It just happens that democracies tend to be a little better at it because, absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. And even if you have a just king,
I
his son might be
I
an
would
idiot.
actually disagree. I would say monarchies are better at it than constitutional republics and liberal democracies. But there's a wonderful book. I'm maybe you have read it, maybe you haven't, by Hans Hermann Hoppe, "The Democracy, the God That Failed," and he lays out in uh, beautiful fashion why monarchies tend to be less violative of rights, and why they function more efficiently, and why they tax substantially less, and it's mostly the argument is, you know, historically with the judicial being under the king, you saw a lot of, abuses, And obviously the times are different, with nobility and peasantry. But the comparisons are often false because the power of the middle class and the poor grows with the industrial revolution, and that when it's kind of comparing apples to oranges. And his argument is that a king that has ownership of the land, that is also attempting to pass on that land to his children, hopefully, is engaging in low time preference behavior. And democracies and elected politicians are engaged in high time preference behavior. And you can see this with things like the national debt blooming out of control, the regularity of which they start wars, the extreme increase in taxation. I mean, think about it, right? We used to tar and feather politicians, pull them out of their homes, cover them in potentially boiling oil, throw feathers at them, and then beat them as they walk down the streets because they dared support a 3% import tax on certain products. Now, where are we at now? 60% of all of your wealth is taxed, right? But I understand your argument. I do. And I don't think, historically speaking, that liberal democracies have done all that worse, and arguably have done much better in terms of civil liberties. And so I get kind of what you're saying, but I disagree with the concept that absolute power corrupts absolutely per se, or that or that liberal democracies are an improvement from monarchies.
Well, the problem with a monarchy, like I'm talking like a high, and I'll check out the book, but like a high level conceptual framework. Like
Mm-hmm.
you could have King John, right, from the Robin Hood story, where you've got the just king, and as long as he's king, everything's great. But in a monarchy, his son gets to be king, and the odds that King John has a son that's also great, kind of vanishingly small. And
How many great politicians do we have currently?
oh yeah, I mean that. But the benefit of a
You know what
democracy,
I mean?
no, no,
You know
no.
what
But
I'm saying?
the benefit of democracy is not that we select the right people, but that we don't have to have a violent revolution to get rid of the wrong ones. It's Democracy's terrible at selecting politicians. It's better at removing them without bloodshed, which is a major point in its
Yeah.
favor.
No, I do agree. I mean, I think Thomas Jefferson kind of wrote that best when he argued that, the changes in elections, and multiple elections, and in federal elections, like he kind of calculated that, like as like 4 years here, 4 years there, 4 years there, and was like, it's actually 128 years of peaceful transition if you think of it, right? Everybody remembers that quote from that longer argument, which is that the tree of liberty needs to be watered with the blood of patriot and tyrants alike from time to time. I could be paraphrasing. I think I got like one or two words wrong there, but you get the quote. But the actual full argument is exactly what you're saying, right? Which is that, like, well, we voted and we had a revolution and we didn't have to kill anybody, and isn't that a good thing? And I do think that there's some merit to that, but I also think that the flip side, the double-edged sword on that, is that it is also kind of crabs in a bucket, right? It's boiled, or crabs being slowly boiled, is that, year after year after year, we have seen since the founding of this country us have less and less rights, and we just magically go, but the 1960s and civil rights, and it's like, that was actually less rights. It was more rights for black people, less rights for all of us as a whole, and we have just seen our rights and our wealth, increasingly more and more wealth stolen, and increasingly we have less and less rights since the founding of this nation,
Well, and
or at
this
the
is
very
like
least since 1913.
this is the I think the area where the we've ignored the, let's call it, a pressure release valve that our founders built into the system. Because the idea with our system is that you have a federal government that is limited in scope with limited powers and that is incredibly unwieldy to use, which is
Mm-hmm.
supposed to mean that all the day to day stuff is being done at the state, or better yet, local level. And democracy works better that way. The odds that you're going to have a policy at the federal level that works for everybody is vanishingly slim. It almost never works. But when you make everything a federal issue, you get exactly what you described, which is kind of inevitably a bloated government that has more and more control over everyone's day-to-day lives and makes less and less good decisions because it can't. It's just not structurally designed to be able to make decisions for a country this big or this complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, like, I think if I was going to pinpoint where it really went wrong, I had to look it up, right? So don't. I'm not going to pretend like I'm a super smart lawyer just because I couldn't remember the name of it. But you'll probably will, Mr. Lawman. Gibbons versus Ogden, right? 1824, where we decided that interstate commerce essentially gave the federal government, this is the first chipping away
Yeah.
of like, what does interstate commerce mean? Well, it basically means the federal government can do whatever the fuck they want. I think that was probably, a big one. 1913, the establishment of the Federal Reserve is another big
Yeah,
one.
the
Obviously
truly,
FDR's years,
yeah,
and the last one,
that's the truly
I
crippling
think.
blow. Is that for those non-lawyers in the audience, in the FDR years, if I recall correctly, I think it was Wicker v.
Mhm.
Filburn. There was a case that basically said, let's say you're, let me back up a level. In theory, the federal government is not supposed to be able to regulate commerce unless it crosses state lines. That's the theory. And if that was true, then if you were just sitting and you had a bookstore in a small town, the federal government couldn't regulate you at all. But I believe this was the 40s, but I could be misremembering. In the FDR era, they decided a case that said if a farmer had grain on their land and the farmer wasn't abiding by some kind of national regulation about how much grain can hit the market, even though the farmer only sold locally, that was still affecting interstate commerce. And
Yes.
once you have that, then everything is interstate commerce. And the reason
Yep.
that happened is that FDR was threatening to pack the Supreme Court. And so
Yep.
basically he said, if you don't find a way to say that interstate commerce is broad, then I'm going to put 6 more justices on and they'll say it. So
Yeah.
a
Because he was a fucking
compromise of sorts
communist.
was reached, but it ever since then we've been on a rocket ship to the moon in terms of the size and complexity of the federal government.
Yeah. So I mean, like, this is an interesting conversation. I think it maybe gets away a little bit from the topic, but sometimes I like to
Mhm.
waffle around, right? I like to feel people out, figure out where they're at. I would also, my chat was suggesting reading Lysander Spooner, Constitution of No Authority. Have you read that?
No, I've not.
So Lysander Spooner is an interesting character, right? So from the ANCAP perspective, right? Many people think, oh, well, you guys are just like classical liberals, and then you went really far. That's true to a certain extent, because we believe in natural rights and natural law. So we share those same beliefs in natural law, right? We might pull from early works like second treatise on government and things like that, homesteading concepts, natural rights, etc. But really, we come from the anarchist vein. We come from Proudhon. But here in America, there was a group of contemporaries that were seen as, would have been like the proto libertarians of their time, right? They were Benjamin Tucker, Lysander Spooner, to a certain extent Voltairine de Cleyre, but she doesn't get much mention in a lot of these things, and Josiah Warren. And one of these guys, Lysander Spooner, um, crazy, crazy. There's a whole thing you can look into him about like the post office and how he tried to set up a competing post office, and then the government came after him and shit. He was a Civil War veteran that fought for the North, but also, after the Civil War and after those many of those abuses of the government, wrote this treatise, Constitution of No Authority, number 6 is the one you want to read. And his basic argument, really the really simple one, is kind of twofold. Number one is this idea, like, a contract requires voluntary consent, and I never signed this fucking contract, so the entire state is illegitimate because they claim that it's voluntary, except I don't get a fucking choice. I don't get a choice but to pay my taxes to a government that bombs people. I don't get a choice to pay. Well, in this instance it was, what if I don't want the Civil War happening? What if I don't want millions of Americans being slaughtered by other Americans? um and so that's that. And then the other argument is essentially this: either the founding fathers created a government that was destined to be as big as it has gotten on purpose, and therefore all of their reasoning was flawed and all of their arguments are bullshit, or they created a system of government that was powerless to stop it, and therefore all of their reasoning is flawed and all of their arguments are flawed by that metric. And so the kind of like the worship of like the original government is literally just a nostalgic attempt to go to a before time that caused the time we're currently in. And so we have to re-examine what our government is and what our founding fathers put forward, because it was destined to fail no matter what their reasoning was and no matter what they did, because it either lacked the power to stop where we are currently, or it was designed to create the situation where we're at currently. And in either case, it is this highly violative, ever expanding state.
That's an I mean, it sounds like an interesting book. My kind
It's
of
an article.
my gut
That one's easy to read.
yeah, my gut reactions to the arguments are social contract theory is nice, but the problem with it is that there are elements of what it means to have a government that are, let's say it, non-optional, right? Like, and the founders talked about this when they were debating whether to have a federal government. And the idea was something like this. Let's say we don't have a federal government and France invades Maine. Now what? Like, the problem with not having a federal government is that you don't have the resources to make defense work on the scale you need. You don't have the resources to make trade work in the way you need.
I think the opposite's true.
Well, I mean, like, the basic logic is, if you don't have a group of people with some kind of patriotic impulse, when the guys with knives and swords come, who do have a group of a patriotic impulse towards their in-group, they're going to beat the shit out of you and take everything you own. So the very basics is that there needs to be some level of government, at least to do, let's say, defense, trade, border security, right? Like kind of like the basics where you don't get to be a state anymore if you don't have
I'm listening. I'm
right. Then the second point I thought was more interesting, but I think he's misdiagnosing it. I don't think the problem is that the system had to lead to this moment. I think the problem is liberty requires constant vigilance, and we stopped teaching civics. We stopped teaching people that you have to go out and fight for this, and we started teaching people that things that aren't natural rights are rights. And this is the socialism angle. Because when you say to someone, have a heart, don't you have empathy? What do you mean you don't think food's a human right? Are you a monster? You must be a moral monster to say food isn't a human right. Well, once you agree food is a human right, now you must have a government that can provide the food to everyone. No matter what. So the government is now this giant apparatus. And then that's one more right against many. So when they say, well, look, we have a trade-off now. Yeah, we're abridging your freedom of speech, but it's to ensure that we can make enough food. And then they've got you, right? So, like, it's a three-step thing. They convince you that positive rights are the same thing as natural rights. Then they hit you with utilitarianism and empathy, and then they offer to trade your liberty for comfort. And we're not teaching people that they need to resist that. That when someone comes to you and says, as Reagan put it, I'm the government, I'm here to help, you should be terrified by that. Your reaction should be absolutely not. And to my point with Econoboy, on moral grounds. I don't need to get into some is this going to work out better? My gut reaction is no, you cannot take away my liberty. Thank you, fuck off. And basically, if I was going to give the TLDR, classical liberals became pussies. That's the problem.
Okay, so there's quite a few things you said here. So the first one is the only thing that you didn't say, which is someone in my chat was like, you need to read the Anti-Federalist Papers. So I just had to go to my bookcase real quick and show you that this is a very worn book with certain corners folded over, which is the essential Federalist and Anti-Federalist Papers compiled by David Morton. It's not all of them. It's just the big ones, because there are a lot of ones that may or may not even be considered Federalist or Anti-Federalist papers, because they're arguments through fucking newspapers, like back and forth against each other. It's not like it's a book that got published somewhere. But I have read a lot of them.
Tangent about that? Holy shit!
Because you gave me four fucking things to address.
Yeah,
first.
you're right. I'll be a good guest.
So the first one, self-defense. I could go into a really, really long argument about it, but luckily, even when I was a minarchist, very close to yourself, not even a full-blown ANCAP yet, I already made a video on this. So if anybody wants to check it out, I'll throw it in the Discord later if you guys remind me. But TLDR, my argument is as thus: um, the economic calculation problem is a thing. There is a desire for self defense. There is a desire for defense of large swaths of land. And the market cannot do a worse job than the state in terms of efficiency at providing self defense. We live in a modern era where it is very easy for insurance companies to charge rates based off of how protected your property and your business is, and where you could alleviate very high insurance rates by paying smaller premiums to private military contractors, PMCs. And my argument is that a anarchist completely destroyed federal government and 1,000 Liechtensteins here in America would not only be able to defend themselves, but would be able to do it at a more cost-effective rate with a more efficient system than the United States government ever could. Because to argue otherwise is to either believe that there is no market incentive to defend property, which I think is a hard argument to take, or to believe that the state has solved the economic calculation problem and that central planners are more efficient than the market. And I think both of those are going to be difficult. But there's way more in depth on that. So that's your first point. Second point, liberty requires constant vigilance, and we're not really teaching that. 100% agree with you. 100% agree with you. I think part of that is the contradiction of the founding fathers, and our lack of. I would say it not only requires constant vigilance, but I would say it also requires constant progress. And what I mean by constant progress is a recognition that the philosophies of our founding fathers or of ancient philosophers must constantly be improved upon. And what I would say is that we are standing on the shoulders of giants and pissing on them instead of standing on the shoulders of giants and trying to get bigger and grow and reach farther towards the sun. We have regressed when in fact we should have progressed. And I think objectivism, anarchism, libertarianism, or as you know, a very small group of us are growing, anarcho-objectivism, is the natural progression of recognizing the contradictions of our founding fathers and continuing to improve upon something that they much of what they said that was true. Concepts like natural rights and quandaries and things. They were brilliant and genius young men, most of them, but they got some things wrong, and it requires not just vigilance but progress. And our education system is going obviously in the exact opposite direction. I would argue that's because the government got involved to a certain degree. But there's another great work by Stirner. Right, Stirner is like a kind of a commie, crazy, at the first ethical egoist, even though he wasn't technically. You might say Nietzsche was the first ethical egoist, or you might say that fucking Rand was. But nevertheless, he wrote a wonderful article called "The False Principle of Our Education," describing how regular education was coming to the masses and how the elite were receiving an education in philosophy and how to think, and the poor that were now being educated were being educated to be productive workers, and they were being educated to be literate and to do arithmetic and to be able to do simple and sometimes even complex tasks, but that they were not being educated to be intelligent. They were not being educated to learn to think. And I think generation after generation after generation, we have moved education more and more towards standardization, more and more towards filling government quotas, more and more towards know these facts, know these things, and completely ignoring philosophy. Like my great grandmother was a woman that went to college. And I remember speaking to her, and it was like a pivotal moment. I was like, what the fuck happened to college? She was like, yeah, I remember, like, oh, I had to study so hard before I tried to apply to college. I was like, oh, like you had like a SAT type thing or something like that. But I was like, oh, but they didn't have those back. Like, what'd you have to do? It's like, oh, we had to prove that you were fluent in Latin, and you had to do that. And I was like, pause. just to apply to college, you had to prove you were fluent in Latin. What the fuck happened to college? It was like that was like a big wake up moment for me. Lastly, you went into how that tied into positive rights versus negative rights. I very very much agree with you, right? That positive rights are not rights at all, um, which is obviously why I'm an anarchist, because many of the arguments that you are arguing for are kind of positive rights, right? You're arguing that we need the state. We have in many ways you're arguing for like the right to self-defense by a government that then steals money from us to fund that self-defense. I would consider that a positive right that you support. But you just don't call it a right, which I think is better, right? Important, certainly a good thing. But I think a recognition of negative rights being the only logical rights is a recognition that all forms of taxation are extortion, slavery, theft, whatever you want to put forward, and that all public property is a violation of property rights, a violation of human rights, and that and that the government that governs best is a government that governs least, and the government that governs least is no government at all, other than those that are voluntary systems. And then lastly, you went into how the concept of positive rights and being able to sell that idea, which I think, mind you, going back to the philosophy part, that is why it's such an easy sell, is because with no philosophy, everything is simply is emotion, your subjective preferences, and so what feels right is what's right, and so it is all emotional manipulation towards the philosophically illiterate, because we don't teach philosophy anymore, and that makes it very easy to push socialism, because socialism is an idea that is essentially just the feminine tendency of equality, is really what socialism is at a grand scale. And so you say consequentialism. I do disagree with you slightly, but I totally kind of understand where you're coming from. But this is more of just like a slight rhetorical thing. I find it sometimes important to actually engage in the consequential analysis if you are a very strong Austrian in your economic argumentation, and you can actually argue that consequentialism doesn't matter because it's a violation of rights, but also the market will be better than the socialism you're arguing for. And I think, especially for normies and people that haven't already adopted a proper philosophy, that you have to make that argument so at the very least they're curious about your philosophy. Sorry to talk for a lot, but I had to go through every point that you made because you made a lot of points.
No, no, and I'm going to try to pick one, and then we can circle back because there's a lot of them, right? So maybe we can try to pick a lane for a little
That's
bit.
why I have a notepad.
Yeah, I
Right?
think the lack of philosophical education, because I'm a former teacher, so that's near and dear to my heart. Or even
Yeah.
just what Stephen Fry calls the Oxford manner, which is like the idea to
Hmm.
gracefully grapple with ideas. That
Yes.
vanishing from society is a real problem, because you're right. If you can't argue philosophy and you don't have a common moral framework, then you can't
Hmm.
really rely on moral arguments. You have to get into the
Yeah.
consequential arguments. But part of what I think, where I think we fail, and when I say classical liberals have been pussies for too long, part of what I think we really fucked up on is, I think Madison had that line where he said, like, this constitutional government, I'm paraphrasing, would only work for people with a religious morality, and it's not meant for any others. And there's a lot of ways
Yeah,
you
he
could,
said a bunch of shit. He also said once Congress discovers the power to
yeah.
tax, that the entire government is defunct.
But what I mean is, yeah,
It's
no, no,
like, and
and
they discovered it.
it's always dangerous to like read too much into like a stray comment. But what I find interesting about that comment is, what good is a constitution if your citizenry doesn't believe in natural rights? Like, what does it get you at that point? Right?
Mhm.
I mean, nothing. They'll amend it, they'll overturn it, it'll be gone. Like, it only we've instilled, and like, sorry, we've installed governments all over the world with tin pot dictatorships that have beautiful bills of rights and these lovely documents that say they're democracies, and they're the worst kinds of governments because they have absolutely no sense of a people as to what natural rights are. And
Mhm.
What I think, at least when I diagnose the problem, what I see is a population that's losing that common moral center to the extent that, maybe it's already gone. Where
Mhm.
people, I'll talk to a utilitarian and they're just like, that's crazy. Like, what matters is harm reduction, and that's why we're saving the fucking shrimp. And the idea that saving the shrimp is a worthwhile thing to talk about when I'm talking about your freedom to worship, your freedom of speech, and you're talking about saving the goddamn shrimp. There's a
Well,
the disconnect is
it,
wild.
there's also something fairly pernicious about growing up without that concept and then deeply internalizing at an emotional level that concept, and the other being foreign. So I'll give you an example from Econo Boy, right? This is the
Mhm,
last time I had like a sit down talk with him, as we were, because and because sometimes I do conversations like this where I'm not really debating, but I'm kind of debating
mhm,
ideas. We're just having a conversation. We're having a dialectic, right? And
mhm,
so we're talking about some economic things, and we brought up the estate tax, right? And I was like, oh, the estate tax is the most evil tax that I can think of, right? It is so pernicious from a consequentialist standpoint. Um, because I mean, outside of the domain of natural rights, I am still essentially a consequentialist.
mhm,
I mean, I'm not, because I'm an objectivist, right? And so I have a value structure that isn't, harm reduction or utilitarian calculus, and it's, like, for all intents and purposes, for the simple-minded that haven't dug deep into like objectivist philosophy, right? It's very similar to consequentialism. It's just the consequentialism of selfishness, if you will. And so I said, from that perspective, you know, estate tax is the worst. And he's like, well, come on, like it only taxes things over $7 million. He's like, well, like, why is that a bit like we're not talking about grandma and grandpa passing on your house, like that's not getting gobbled up in estate taxes. And I was like, well, so here's the problem. Here's how it works in reality: is that there are basically two people that get hit with the estate tax. There's some people in between, but there's two major groups that get hit. The first group are the ultra wealthy. And what they do is they get a lawyer. They get the lawyer to draft a last will and testament. They give a certain portion of it to charity. And the way that they give it to charity is, instead of giving it to, fucking Doctors Without Borders, they set up in their children's name a trust fund. And then they also set up in their children's name a, um, some charity organization that they'll become the CEO of, that they can then have like 40% overhead off of, that allows them to essentially pass on the wealth and let their kids be philanthropists. But really it's just a way to get NGO and government money to their children, so that they can recoup all of their taxes, and then they can go do fancy dinners and things like this in the name of charitable donations that then get them business contacts, etc. And so effectively they don't pay any fucking taxes. In fact, they end up reaping more of our taxes than they actually pay, and the estate tax becomes defunct. And it would just be far better if you just let people pass on the wealth to their kids, instead of having all these crazy loopholes that the rich do. The second one is farmers that have these large plots of family land that on paper are worth a fuck ton of money, but in reality, when you're attempting to farm the land, you don't make a lot of profit. You only make, 50 to 100K a year, with a big business and a bunch of employees and a bunch of, there's a lot of cost to running this farmland. And while the land is worth a lot, because, Monsanto or Bill Gates or whoever can come in and, spend $20 million for your land, that $20 million worth of land is really only enough for the kids in the family to have like middle class wages, and now they have to pay these insane taxes. And so what ends up happening over and over and over again is every generation is forced to sell a portion of their family land that they don't want to sell, because they have to, so that they can pay the government taxes. And then when we talked about that, and I was like, this is horrible. Like, imagine your family came here from the 1800s, and your grandpa, your great great grandpa built this house that you're living in, and you were raised in this house, and your goal is to work on this land, and every generation, less and less of this land is in your hands, and the property becomes less and less profitable, and there's nothing you can do about it. And he said, well, you're saying that the land can be built for $20 million. I can't imagine feeling sorry for someone that can just sell the land for $20 million and then go live in the city. And wouldn't you be happy that a larger corporation that's more efficient at using the land would be able to more efficiently produce food at a lower cost? Like, it's just crazy to me that that matters. They should pay that tax. And I don't care if they get driven off of the land. They're millionaires now. Like, how am I supposed to feel bad for millionaires? And I was like, oh, your entire moral compass is completely broken because you have no emotional tie or concept to the to even any vague notion of liberty or order or a family structure of property that is passed down and living on the land that your forefathers had. Like, you have no American patriotic ideals whatsoever. Literally your entire compass is just pseudo numbers on a piece of paper doing a utilitarian calculus and a hidden hatred for those with wealth.
Well, this is what I was trying to get at him because he said, and the shrimp welfare guys also said that they weren't making a utilitarian argument. And my point was, maybe you're not, but it's built on a utilitarian chasis. Like there's no way to explain why you think the way you think without it being a utilitarian framework. Because if you had other values, like you said, like the idea that
Mm-hmm.
if a man takes property, improves it, works it,
Mm-hmm.
employs people. Why do you do that? Why do you spend your life toiling on these things? Well, a big reason why is so that your kids can have a better life. That's why people do these things. And if you make it impossible for people to transfer wealth to their children, then yes, that is going to have, even on like a consequentialist line of reasoning, a really detrimental effect on the productivity of
Yep.
people. Because like
Well, to be fair, you could make an argument that isn't utilitarian for the non-killing of shrimp, right? But that argument would require the trolley problem to change from 400 shrimp to one shrimp, which is you would have to say that shrimp deserve rights to the same degree that humans do. And you would have to make the argument that if there were two shrimp on the train tracks, that you would be willing to kill a human to save two shrimp because of like the rights reduction.
yeah.
Like there are ways to make it make sense. It would just require you to say batshit insane things far beyond the fact that, we need to save the shrimp.
Yeah, and I mean, and this might dovetail into your point about the military that you made earlier, but maybe not. We'll see where it goes. There's also kind of a lack
See
of
that, chat? This is another person that thinks through speaking like
yeah,
I do. He's like, we'll see where it
yeah.
goes. As I'm talking,
As
new
I'm
ideas
talking,
formulate
we'll
into the
see.
argument.
Um, there's something about that sort of like utilitarian calculus where we make the policy in this kind of numeric way and we're just adding up the numbers that cuts against the idea of community, of there being anything that would bind people together that's worth
Mm-hmm.
keeping, that isn't reducible to a spreadsheet, right? Like it's a very flat analysis. And I think this is why when you talk to
Mm-hmm.
people who have this worldview, they can sometimes come across like they're so crazy. Justice Scalia gave this incredible speech once where he was talking to some Italian American affinity group. And he was saying that one of the things that it was so great about being Italian is that he knew so many other Italians. And some of them he agreed with and some of them he disagreed with. But
Mm-hmm.
because he viewed them as his paisans, then it's like, even if I think that they're wrong about everything, I understand the ties that bind us together, right? But if you're just
Right.
purely transactional and I disagree with you and I'm preventing you from ushering in the utopia, like what's your tie that binds to me in a utilitarian world? Right? What are we?
I don't think those two are mutually exclusive. I think you can be purely transactional. What I think is important to recognize, though, is I think it's less so that like a problem per se. It is a problem of utilitarianism, but I think the diagnosis is slightly off. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll figure it out together, right? Which what it is that there are unknown variables, and number one, and number two is that value is subjective, and so there are unknown variables. Like what are community bonds, right? And so, for example, one of the things that I argue, very weirdly, I think I'm probably the only person on the internet doing this right now. Maybe there's 10 of us, but the other 9 are completely unknown to me. Is I argue that socialism and social security and programs like that are the number one cause for all of our dating and gender issues today. They are like not a pure univariate analysis, but they are the major cause for the destruction of for the low birth rate, for the the gender roles being an issue, for the quote unquote chopped epidemic, for the the increasing category of incels, the increasing category of women that have checked out of the dating market. All of these red pill podcast conversations I draw back to socialism, and one of the things that I discuss when I talk about this is the the what did we have before social security? Well, we had the Great Depression. And then what did we have right before that is that we had mutual aid societies and fraternities. And fraternities made up 1 out of every 3 American men was a part of a fraternity, a fraternal organization. And the overwhelming majority of these fraternal organizations provided healthcare through the healthcare lodge system. The way the healthcare lodge system worked is a whole bunch of people would get together and they'd put on their funny little hats and put on their little badges, right? And they'd talk about community issues and they'd be like, "Hey, John lost his job at the factory. We all got to pitch in and help out John," right? Or you pay your dues. Now, the average price of these institutions, well, for example, the Great Moose Lodge, I'll use that one, which was 1 out of every 29 Americans at its peak was in the Great Moose Lodge. For the median salary of a working man of 1 week, that was what you paid for a yearly membership due in the Great Moose Lodge. And what you were protected from is you had unemployment insurance, you had health care where you could see a doctor whenever you had an emergency, and you got yearly checkups. You had, if you died, your wife would be taken care of, and they had orphanages and schools to send your children to. And those schools that the Great Moose Lodge had set up had something like a 60% higher average salary rate earnings of children that graduated from that school than the average American, and something like 70% for women. So you had all of these insane benefits that would require like half your fucking salary today. And one of the major reasons why this worked is because they were based off of the individual's community and what the individual valued. They were not stolen from your paycheck and then given to the government, and then the government promised to take care of somebody. The reason these were destroyed was because the elite college educated doctors were offended because healthcare costs were too low. I'm going to repeat that. They were destroyed because doctors in this country at the turn of the century were deeply offended that poor people were being able to negotiate doctors' salaries because they were able to collectivize and say, you're not good enough, or we're going to go with this other doctor. He seems to give better care, or he's cheaper, etc. And then they petitioned the government in multiple states to ban the healthcare lodge system, to begin to deeply regulate it. They made it illegal for healthcare lodges to own hospitals. They made it illegal for them to own, Great Moose Lodge system for that 1 week salary also had elder care facilities. So you had like a nursing home to go to if your family couldn't take care of you and things like that. And so then all of a sudden they destroyed all of these systems, and about 7-8 years afterwards, well, what do you know? The elderly poverty rate is this huge deal that we have to fix, and we have to fix it with Social Security. And the most hilarious thing is because it's before 1913, we don't have great data, but we do have some data, specifically in New York and a couple other places where they did surveys. And it looks like the elderly poverty rate, from the best data we have available, did not reach parity with the mutual aid societies until 1997. It took them 60 years to fix the elderly poverty rate to the same degree it was when we had mutual aid societies. And so it's like, I actually disagree with you to a certain extent that you cannot be transactional within your own individual choice, or that like what I would say is that there are all of these elements that are kind of the baby with the bathwater things, right? That are hidden. These are variables that you can't actually determine. You can't put on the paper. And so they get left out of the equation. And so your math is always wrong. The socialists, the utilitarians' math is always wrong. And it's because value is subjective. and it changes over time. And the only cogent the only cogent philosophy that deals with choices via preference, I would say, is anarcho-objectivism or objectivism, in the sense that it allows you to be transactional based off of what it is that you value, and does not allow for the state to interrupt those values, because it always fails because the calculation doesn't work out.
Okay. Again, we're gonna be talking in paragraphs, so I think we're gonna keep having all these different threads. To complete a funny part of the story that I learned recently, because I didn't know this, and then
Real quick. I know I talked way too much, but there was someone in the comments, and I just want to address it before we don't ignore him. There is a fuck ton of evidence. They wrote multiple articles. They petitioned the government multiple times, and they stated over and over and over again that the prices were too low and the price negotiations were bad because they weren't as safe as the systems that their private practices would uphold and their bars. And it is the reason for the establishment of the American Medical Association is to have doctors and the elite try and fight back against price negotiations from the poor and the middle class. You are full of shit to just say there is no evidence because it just doesn't agree with what you believe to be true. Fuck off, socialist. Continue.
there you go. Just to finish the story time, then in in the FDR era during the war, he created wage controls that created a maximum wage, and because the wage had a cap, in order for employers to get around that and still attract people, they started offering health insurance as part of your comp package. The IRS then ruled that that was not taxable, and that's how we ended up with employer-based health insurance. So
Yep.
the interventions in the market continued to have these bizarre downstream effects afterwards. I guess what I would say, what I would say to you about that's interesting is utilitarianism. The way I look at it is it would be a wonderful moral system for an all-powerful, omniscient God to use. Like if you had perfect information and you had perfect understanding of all the values and you knew everything, okay, maybe. But in reality, everybody just uses heuristics. But because they don't believe in natural rights, their heuristics are bad. So you get what Ken Wilber referred to as flatland, where just the data that fits in the spreadsheet.
Ken Wilber, that's the documentarian guy that does like all the.
No, he's still living, I think, though he's getting up there. He's a American philosopher who the only person I know who's a fan of him is, you know that account It's Homath on X?
Yeah.
He's a big Ken Wilber guy. But like
that's Ken Burns. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, Ken Wilber.
But
the name sounded familiar, but I couldn't.
In any event, he described this phenomenon of flatland, which I thought was a beautiful concept, and that's the problem with utilitarianism. Is that, as you said, all the work is done in how you pick the values and how you pick your measurement and what you measure, and then that dictates your outcome. The thing that was lost, and I think in your example that you gave, it's an interesting one, is the beauty of the federal system if it were allowed to operate the way it's supposed to operate, which is, okay, this state has this retirement program, and they have this social safety net program, and they have this health insurance program. Texas, on the other hand, they want the Moose Lodge. They don't want to do that stuff. And now,
federalism is, federalism.
Then we can see what works.
Theory,
right? Like, if not, we're not going to play a guessing game. We're going to say, oh shit, we ran the experiment. It looks like the Moose Lodge is doing pretty well, right? But like when the federal government intrudes, you lose the laboratory of experimentation, and that's the whole fucking point.
Yeah, no, I do agree that it is, more localized. Why is someone in Washington, D.C. making fucking decisions about the lives of people in Juneau, Alaska, right? It's absurd. It's fucking absurd. No one in Washington, D.C., unless they're from Juneau, Alaska, has any fucking concept of what life is like out there, right? It's an entirely different culture. I remember I had a guy in the Army, when I was in AIT, advanced individual training, learning to be a combat medic, and healthcare specialist is what I ended up doing. But regardless, same job, just didn't go into like a combat unit. When I was doing that, we had this guy from Alaska, and he came in and he was calling all the black people. He was like, he almost got into a fight and had to stop a fight. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? Why are these black dudes about to beat up this white dude? Like, what is happening? Because he was like, and he was from deep in Alaska, and he was like, I don't understand what they're mad about. And I'm like, what happened? He's like, this dude won't stop calling us coloreds. And I was like, yo, what is happening? And he was like, that's what they're called. What the fuck? I'm not racist. Like, what's going on? You know? And he was like, you can't fucking call people that like at all. And he's like, well, it's the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, right? Like, it's fucking, why is it a problem? And then we all stopped and we were like, that is still the name of the NAACP. That's weird, you know? And he was like, dude, I didn't mean anything by it. I love you guys. You're awesome. You're my battle buddies, man. And it's like the country is full of like go to New Orleans. That's an entirely different fucking world. Like that place is completely fucking different than anywhere else in the country. You know, and it's like the idea that people in DC make decisions for those people. So as an anarchist, of course, I agree with you that the system of federalism, in theory, is is superior because you get at the time of the founding fathers it would be 13 experimental labs, 50 now, right? But the problem is in practice is that the Constitution afforded all of the power to the federal government. It was designed to do that. It was it was on purpose.
It really
wasn't on purpose.
But it moved that direction. And
I mean, it literally was because it happened, right?
Well,
and it happened through justification of the systems
for that purpose. It was misused for that purpose. That's a different thing.
But it was okay, but I mean, if a thing is what it does, and if it gives the power for it to be abused in such a way, then it was designed with those faulty systems in it that led to where we are today. Like I get that that's not what the Thomas Jefferson envisioned, right? You know what I mean? Like I get Madison, Monroe, like I get that they weren't envisioning this this authoritarian state that taxes 60% of our wealth and is 14% of all of those taxes are going towards debt, and we have a criminal justice system that is insanely overburdening and that states have no power. I get that they didn't envision that like we would have direct elections of senators because that's exact opposite of what they want. There's a lot of things they didn't envision. I totally agree with you. But they created a system that created what this is. And so by design, it created where we're at.
Well, but it also did stuff like, we have Louisiana, right? We have California. That's not Mexico and France. So, like if we don't have...
That's James K. Polk, motherfucker. 54-40 or fight, all right? Like, what do you mean?
What I'm saying
that was his campaign slogan, by the way.
Yeah,
he fought the British for fucking
There are certainly benefits that come with the necessary evil, and that's why the necessary evil is necessary, right? And I think you and I could probably...
There is no such thing as a necessary evil. I would disagree.
Well,
always.
Yeah, I mean, I get where you're coming from philosophically, and this is always, because at the end of the day, when people ask me, like, what's your political orientation? Do you know how much fucking easier my life would be if I could just say libertarian? But the reason I can't is that I'm just not utopian enough. Like, there are certain...
I'm not utopian.
Yeah, the practicality... Like,
I dare say I'm more doomer-pilled than you. No, I dare say that I have less faith in institutions and people and power than you.
We could organize national defense in a way that would protect American interests without a centralized government. That strikes me as optimistic to the point that I would call it, maybe not utopian, maybe that's not an unfair word, but like the level of optimism there, I don't agree with. I think that there are...
I agree. Let me challenge that. I agree with you. Let me challenge that. Just in the same way that you argued that you do not care about the consequential analysis, you care about the concept of property rights. What I would say about my philosophy is that my philosophy is the only system of justifiable ethics that is not inherently conflict-inducing, and that it is a possibility that we could do that. It is also a possibility that we could fail and we get invaded by China or like some fucked up shit happens. But my system is the only system that is ethically justifiable, that doesn't say that there are necessary evils in it. And that the one I would argue, right, and I'm trying to be nice here and I'm not trying to turn this into a debate, but I would argue, right, just as a counter argument, that what you're saying is some evil is necessary because of because I worry that we will have a consequentially worse America. So I'm willing to violate some rights in the name of the necessary evils so that we can have a consequentially better thing. And I'm not saying I'm utopian. And I understand you were kind of already backpedaling it because it was just a word you were throwing out anyways. And you're thinking through speaking, you're not really attacking me in that way. But I would say that I'm not saying I'm utopian. I'm saying that is a possibility. And with 1,000 Liechtensteins, just like 50 states of federalism, where some states are going to fail and some states are going to succeed, I will have more laboratories to test those successes. And that we will eventually get to a better place, but that there will always be fraud. There will always be violence. There will always be bad people. There will always be failures. But just because my house might catch on fire in the future doesn't mean that I don't put out the fire that's currently burning my house down. And that I look at the current system as one that is ethically unjustifiable and is conflict inducing and therefore violative of any concept of ethics. And the one I'm proposing has the possibility of of an ethical framework. But of course, there will be evil people, there will be bad people, and there will be failures, and there will be death, and there will be misery. But all of those things are already existing in our current system and they're baked into the system. There is no possibility of it not being there.
I think might see where the moral disagreement might be. Like when I
Mm-hmm.
view, like, let's say, like, political philosophy, and you say, like, how is society built? I almost view it like a pyramid. Like, you have the foundational, the widest block, and then you have narrower blocks that you stack on top of it. And the foundational block of any society is essentially nationalism. It's, it might be a state, it might be a city, it might be a Liechtenstein, it might be a
Mm-hmm.
country, like but whatever, it might be a god, it might be a religion. I don't know, like, but we're the people of the fucking tree. But whatever it is, the foundational block is, this is who we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because
Mm-hmm.
we have that block, we will defend outside our kin group. Like, it's not like I'm only going to defend my family; I'm going to defend my neighbor too, because we're in the same in group, even
It's
if we're not
identity.
kin, right? The
There's some
util,
shared identity
yeah,
and some
having
shared
that,
means of trade and things of that nature
yeah.
that's mutually beneficial where we share culture and values in some domain. I agree with
Yeah.
all of that.
And natural rights theory, historically, came from societies that already figured out the first layer, right? So they figure that out. And then you layer on top of this, oh shit. Well, now that we have this society that's going to defend itself, that's going to protect us from other societies that want to take our shit, there are things that even the government of our society shouldn't be allowed to do. There are things that
Mhm.
just that we need to put limits on it, and you build that on top of the foundation. So to me, when I say, like, yeah, there's a necessary evil, I see why that comes across like a contradiction. But what I mean is, that's the structure. You start on the bottom and then you add more on top of it. So I'm not sure that.
But there's no necessary evil in what you described, right? Like the most anarchist society in America is probably the beachy Amish, right? They're completely insular. They're completely voluntary. They're extremely connected by their identity. They're extremely connected by their religious beliefs. Um, and they do Rumspringa, right? So when children come of age, they force them out of their society, tell them to go look in the world and make sure that if you come back, that this is what you truly want, right? So pure voluntary society. They are their brother's keeper, right? Like they have cell phones, the beach Amish. This isn't the same as like
Mhm.
the Dutch Amish with like horses and shit, right? They have cell phones, but most of them have like their church members look through their cell phone to make sure that they're not falling to the temptations of pornography and things like that. They have wonderful community. The women are fucking helping raise the kids. They're coming to big cookouts. They're like, it's the most beautiful fucking society any conservative could ever dream of. And the only thing that's keeping them from being ANCAPs is that they have to pay the federal government money. And so I don't disagree with you that libertarianism doesn't work when a society becomes in conflict with itself in terms of its morality and its values and its identity, right? You can have multiple ethnic groups in a community, right? And like that comes with tension to a certain degree. Research seems to suggest that it's a lot of tension when it's only two or three, and when it's like four or five, it kind of goes away. There's a lot of good research out of that from like Singapore, but then again, Singapore has a top-down authoritarian king, or at least it did when a lot of this research occurred. So I don't disagree with any of that. I just don't. I don't think that in any way. I think there's a jump in the logical conclusion that then therefore certain elements of the state are necessary. I think there's an illogical leap there that doesn't tie those things together. In fact, I would say that anarcho-capitalism would would solve many of these problems where you have a state that is forcing people that disagree with each other, that don't share common values, that don't share certain things, especially with things like civil rights legislation that says it's illegal for a landlord to discriminate against out group preferences. It's illegal for a business to say that you can't be in here because you're not one of us. It's illegal for a town to be based upon racial or religious, ethnic groups and things like that. The religions sometimes can skirt it like the Amish, right? Because they're a little bit more constitutionally protected than racial discrimination, for example, because one is intrinsic characteristic and the other is behavior. But you get what I'm saying? I just don't. I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you 100% until we get to what I see to be a logical jump of therefore we need some element of a national state to force all of these people that disagree with each other and ought to be in different communities that share different values to then be packed together and live together despite that to me seems actually antithetical to your argument, not just a logical leap.
No, I think that it's almost in some senses, and it's a useful conversation. It's almost an argument like a Bayesian argument from tradition, right? Where like what I'm kind
Mm-hmm.
of saying is
Mm-hmm.
I view myself as like a relatively clever guy, but I'm just one guy trying to be clever, right? And the bloody arc of history has taught us that if you don't have the sort of structure that allows your in group to defend itself, then the people that do are going to take your shit from you and you won't get to be a society anymore. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean
That doesn't require a state.
no, well, it always has. Now, or sorry, I don't want to say always, that's a big claim. It has in the vast majority of historical examples we could talk to. Now, does that mean that it's the only way? No, and I think that's your point. But when I look at this from like a Bayesian lens, right? Like I'm going to say like, well, what would
Mm-hmm.
it take to disturb my prior? Depends how strong my prior is. My prior
Mm-hmm.
for the need for a government to provide for at minimum trade leverage, defense, border
Oh yeah.
security is
So
unbelievably high. Like the amount of
I
evidence I would
agree.
need to just
I agree
yeah.
in terms of the rhetorical argument to convince the people because we both agree that a libertarian society doesn't work if nobody in the society is libertarian, right? And so I agree that you have to win a certain segment of the population over to get this to be to get this to be adopted by that population at large, or you have to isolate in some capacity, much like the Free State Project is trying to do in New Hampshire. It is ambitious, but I agree to that. You've kind of discovered the reason for the name of my channel, right?
Yeah.
Which is Fabian Liberty, because it's an inversion of the Fabian Society's strategy, right? I am an incrementalist because I don't think I think great men plant seeds for the trees of which the shade they will never sit in, right? I don't think I don't think I can convince anybody to hit the button tomorrow that destroys the U.S. government, and I don't even think that would I think it is overwhelmingly likely that even if I did that tomorrow, that would do anything other than just create a bunch of warlords and a lot of large corporations that would use this as a means of getting rid of even less rights and using even more control and even more power and would lead to less freedom. That is why my argumentation really comes down to okay, I see it, I see it, I see it. How do we handle security? How about a fucking small town in Georgia somewhere finally be allowed to have a private corporation be their police as opposed to a locally elected sheriff? And we'll let the funds still be state gathered, and we'll let the local town still vote on whatever corporation does it, and they'll hand out a contract amongst multiple competing firms. And then let's look at that and see how many rights violations occur. Let's see what rights look like with a private corporation that is beholden to a contract, as opposed to all of the Supreme Court cases that have protected cops to the point where they basically can do whatever the fuck they want and they're held to no standard. And even if they are held to a standard, the most that happens is they get fired, or in rare cases, they actually serve prison time. And even then, you win your court case and it just comes from the taxpayers anyways. Like the police unions and qualified immunity and, all of the fucking exceptions to the Fourth Amendment violations that have been added over time, like, the special exemptions and egress laws and all the Supreme Court cases that have basically said that your car isn't your property or some shit, right? Like all of these things. Let's have a private company do this. And I think what'll happen is that you'll find it's cheaper, it's more efficient, and that there's less rights violations as a whole. And I think when you get that once, all of a sudden a couple other towns go, well, fuck, man, I would like something that's cheaper with less rights violations that everybody is in favor of. Let's try that. And I think you try that once, you try it twice, you try it 3 times, and before you know it, you have 100 of them. And before you know it, one of these states is like, do we really need state troopers? Or can we just have a fucking private corporation do the job of state troopers? But I recognize no one is going to pull the trigger on let's get rid of the NSA and the CIA and the FBI tomorrow, and let's get rid of all of the police, and like we'll figure it out with companies, right? Like I think predominantly the most important thing that I advocate for, first and foremost, is not reduction in taxes, which is crazy to hear an ANCAP say, and it's not reduction in spending, though both of those things are highly important to me. The number one thing that I think is more important than anything is the reduction of regulations that make it illegal for a private company to compete with the services of the state. It is the abolishment of those monopolies to allow companies to enter into the market and prove that even when you are taxed to make a system work, sometimes a private company can find a way to do it better, even against a competitor that can tax. And I think that is like the first step in pulling back the state. Because like you and I are so fucking closely aligned on so many issues that it's like, let's check back in 30 years. And if we get the world you want, I think you'll be way more receptive to the world that I'm asking for. Because so many things that I'm would have implemented in the world that you want will make a lot more sense and we'll have a lot more proof.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point, right? Because like I'm going to generalize here a little bit, but like you brought up anti-federalist literature earlier in this conversation, right? And like I would describe someone said, if I was talking to someone and I knew they understood the lingo, they said, "What are your politics?" I'd say, "I'm a small government federalist." Like that's what I want, federalism, and I want a small federal government. At the time of the founding, you and I would have been writing newspaper articles about how bad the other person's ideas were because they're so far apart. Today,
Mhm.
I think we're actually pretty close to like one side of the spectrum in a lot of these areas. And the
Yeah.
question becomes, I think, the one that you raised, which is, one, how do you push back the creep of the federal government such that the laboratory doors open again and people can start trying new ideas? And then two, what are we going to do about an education system, and particularly, I mean, undergraduate, that mass produces utilitarianism? And I
There's
really
only
do
one way.
mean that because when I speak
There's
to
one
someone
way.
who graduated undergrad,
Abolish federal student loans.
I mean,
We have to
I
abolish
think that
federal
that's
student
got
loans.
that's got to be it, right? Because there is no, I mean, first of all, sending everyone to college just means that college no longer does the thing that college is supposed to do. Because if everyone goes, no one goes. It's not really designed for that.
Yeah, there's a term in sociology called McDonaldization.
Hmm.
So McDonald's and then
Yeah.
ization, right? Um, and it's based off of like McDonald's putting in like just the corporate model of McDonald's, and that is what the university system has done. Is that they said, well, the government is ensuring that all of these people are going to pay us no matter what, because the government is going to give these people the money to come to school. Okay, well then how do we make more money? Well, the best way to make more money is to expand how many people come to school. obviously, because the government is guaranteed that so many people go to school regardless of the value of the education or not. And then the government has also set up this monopoly of credentialism, right? You can't be an engineer unless you have an engineering degree. You can't be a hairdresser unless you have a hairdresser school certificate. You can't be a doctor unless the AMA approves, because they want to make sure the doctors don't become too cheap. So they artificially lower how many doctors can actually graduate, right? There's all these licensing and government controls, and then there's the guarantee of money. And so, of course, college has been dumbed down to essentially be daycare for older teenagers, because that is the inevitable conclusion of those things. And then it becomes a now you it becomes a from the 1960s forward, right? The Frankfurt School and critical theorists go, here is a place that the young are being educated, and that is an important pillar of society, right? Which is higher education is an incredibly important pillar of society. And so it is ripe for ideological subversion. There's perhaps no place better for ideological subversion than the university system. Other than once you have the university system teaching critical pedagogy, right? Because Pedagogy of the Oppressed, right, which is Paulo Freire, who's a Marxist. He is the number one cited um, person in all of the humanities and in education. Overwhelmingly, the entire education system is designed to create Marxists at a young age. You know, we have social emotional learning, where they're trying to teach one third, second step alone, which they support transformative social emotional learning. They've worked with Psychus, whose slogan is sex education for children. They have done summits with Sumi Cho, Ibram X. Kendi, oh my God, the female that wrote the white privilege book that
Robin
was Right
DiAngelo.
Fragility. Right, like so this group is in one third of all elementary schools in America, teaching a program of social emotional learning, which is a psychological intervention that was designed for school counselors to target children with oppositional defiant disorder and ODD and oh God, there's another one. I can't remember it right now, but it doesn't matter. They're basically the same thing, anyways. Like two categories of the DSM with like the same fucking criteria. It really only matters for ICD-10 coding. But right, so in one third, they're trying to target children that have individualistic beliefs, and then teach them to stop having individualistic beliefs and be uncomfortable, which is so that they can go into the zone of proximal development that they stole from Vygotsky. What it means is they want to break them down by teaching them about their white privilege and how they're wrong and how their individualistic beliefs are evil, so that they can go into this zone of learning, so that we can target all of the children that would believe in rights and would believe in individualism and would grow up to be constitutional conservatives or libertarians, and try and instead train them towards transformative social emotional learning, which means engaged in critical democracy and protest for equality for all and things of that nature, right? So you start with the universities, and then you get the teachers, and then you go into the elementary schools, and we're already there. We're already at a point where somewhere between 40 to 50% of all children are being groomed by their teachers towards Marxist philosophy as a core component of the entire education system.
And it's funny,
And
you
but
said
the
earlier something
conservatives are
about,
completely just unaware.
yeah, earlier you were talking about how like critical theory came out of the law schools, which it did. And you made a crack about like, how few lawyers come out of law school conservative, especially I mean, let's like bracket U Chicago in a few corner cases, but like
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah,
University of Chicago's always been a bad. I mean, it's Milton Friedman
yeah,
School. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's got its own little
it's got its own
twist.
thing. But by and large, you're right. And it's so funny because the if I was going to trace that back historically, because I was a teacher before I went to lawyer, so I went to teacher training programs, right? So I've seen what you're describing, and one of the things that I think kept me out of that particular school of thought is that in when I was an undergrad, the only things I studied were philosophy and martial arts. Like I basically went to philosophy classes and then ditched and then
Yeah,
went to martial arts classes.
nothing will make you conservative quicker than martial
Oh,
arts. Martial arts makes everyone a
for
conservative.
sure. But and that's kind of the thing where I was saying we are talking about
It
college
requires
before.
humility.
It requires humility, and then also uh, when you're not in a classroom where you can redefine the terms so that
Reality.
you're right. When you're in reality, the world just functions differently. Like I have a lot of blue collar friends and like kind of like different like people I interact with, and I don't think that they would
Listen, Chad, he's one of
necessarily.
the good ones. All
Yeah,
right. He's not one of these liberal elites. He's got blue collar
collar
friends.
friends. No,
He's
I mean
also not racist. He's got some black
I
friends.
do. Yeah, I got. I mean, we can go on. Asian friends too, but no, the
Well, you said you went to law school.
yeah, there you go. No, but what I was saying is, I don't know that like my buddies who like didn't go to college would be able to articulate natural rights theory to me in like beautiful language, but they all
No.
live that way. Like that's how they operate in the day-to-day world. They're not going
Yeah.
around being like, how do I reduce harm and our shrimp is valuable as people? Like it would never cross their fucking mind. But they
It's like that song Richmond North of Richmond from
Mhm.
Oliver North, right? He's an Appalachian man. My dad actually like the hunting club is on his property, right?
Mhm.
Like that is the salt of the earth people. The people they can't they're not sagacious. They're not particularly articulate in their they're not they're not going to give you flowing poetry. Um but the soul is there, and that soul is very often either communist or very libertarian, and very rarely any of these other ideologies. It's one or the other. It's either I hate all these fucking rich dudes, I hate the way corporations berate us, I want equality for all, et cetera, et cetera. Like right, they're the true proletariat, right? And they're without the capacity to really eloquently say so, or they're very libertarian. They're like, what the fuck am I working my ass off for, to have half my money stolen
Mhm.
so that welfare queens somewhere can go do some other shit, especially in a lot of these towns that are full of drugs and fentanyl and things like that now.
Well, I mean, but I guess these are the battlefields, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting because like having these conversations that led into this one, like that's fucking shrimp debate and the debate with the counter boy. Yeah, that's what I came to realize is that like if you've imbibed this kind of harm reduction as your moral center,
Mm-hmm.
then our axioms are just so far apart that I don't know that I'm going to be able to convince you of anything at that point. Like I think we might have reached a point where it's almost like you're just a member of a different religious faith, right? Like I'm not going to convince you. You
We're seeing it all on the right too,
yeah,
right? Like socialism is on the rise far more on the right than it is on the left these days.
they don't, and I don't know that they see it coming adequately. Like it's creeping on the edges, and there are people who are shouting alarm bells, but I don't know that they're being
Well,
heard.
unfortunately, most of the people that are shouting alarm bells are the fucking worst kinds of people to be able to be the ones doing it, right? Like they're like James Lindsay, right? They're the like the worst spokesman for the growing danger of socialism on the right is like the biggest mouthpiece, right? And it's almost driving more people towards that. Um
What
because,
about James
like
makes him the worst in your opinion
I'm
for
sorry,
this?
I'm not hearing you.
Oh, sorry. What about James makes him the worst for this role?
Ruh-roh. You're not lighting up on Discord either. So either your mic
Oh
accidentally
shit!
got muted.
Now,
Yeah, you're good.
yeah, I just lost my finger grip on my mic key. So what about James Lindsay
Oh,
makes him the
this
worst?
is fucking using push to talk right now, boys. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you would not
I
believe
felt
how
mean.
fucking
Yeah, I
bad
saw it
I
in your
suck at
face. You're like,
AP.
fuck off.
No, the what I was gonna say is what about James Lindsay makes him the worst for this? Because he was very good at pointing out the dangers from the left, but
Because he's a liberal.
there seems to be a problem with him coming from the because he's classically liberal or liberal liberal. What do you think?
I'd say he's like a center left classical liberal with too many left wing ideals. And that gave him the capacity and the understanding to adequately communicate Marxism and critical theory in a way that the right was kind of incapable of doing it. Unfortunately, two things happened. One, a lot of people followed suit. A lot of people started beginning to learn what critical theory is, what's the history of critical theory, who are like before James Lindsay. It was a handful of people that knew who Paulo Freire was, despite the fact that Pedagogy of the Oppressed has something like 400,000 citations, right? Which is insane. Uh, right, and that's only counting the fact that they're not like jacketing, one piece of research that that is actually just restating what he said. You know what I mean? So it's more pervasive than that. You know what I mean? And then a lot of people started learning. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that he's attempting to do the same thing that he did to the left, the exact same strategy to the right. And he's very sloppy. He's very petty. He loves to like post things online without explanation and be like, if you know, you know. Oh, you don't know, then you must be stupid. He has Reddit moderator energy about it. Um, and he's full of himself. So you have a center left guy. F your goal, mate. Yo, grid. You didn't have to do that. I appreciate it. Holy shit. Thank you. I appreciate it. The war bonds are overflowing. Thank you so much. Oh man, I gotta buy tickets now. um, but anyways, right. So I think it's a multivariate thing, right? It's his behavior, it's who he is, and it's also his political, um, his political place. And then also, I think the problem with socialism on the left. Well, I mean, not there's a lot of problems with socialism on the left. The thing about socialism on the left that allowed somebody like James Lindsay to critique it. Um, is for the right is it's the right looking at the left and the left having all of these horrible ideas. When you're doing it to the right and you're trying to do that, you can't take your like the left doesn't forgive, right? So there's no center right, center left, far left people that are going to forgive James Lindsay for everything that he did against the left to then wake up to the awakening of socialism on the right. And the other thing is that socialism on the right is coming in the vein of populism. And populism is a kindergarten ideology, right? It's a sophomoric ideology, but that isn't to say that it's stupid. It's simply the beginning of an ideology. That's what it always is. Populism arises when the society is unstable, when all of the promises of stability are now being broken, and everyone begins to realize that some group, call them the Jews, call them the elite, call them the bourgeoisie, whatever it is, becomes now the representation of all of the problems in society. And it's usually, at least in part, true, because when a society is unstable and there's a bunch of wealthy, powerful people at the top, it's like, hey man, the buck stops here. We deserve it. And so populism can become kind of anything, right? It could become, I mean, like populism in our early American history became liberal democracy, right? Populism has become communism. Populism has become fascism. Populism can become libertarianism, right? But I think we're in a position where you cannot fight the populism unless you unless you fix all of the problems, and that is an insanely unlikely scenario. And so if you are fighting against the populism for the old guard and establishment, it doesn't matter what the fuck your critiques are, right? Like if you're fighting for neoliberalism, it is always going to fall on deaf ears when you're calling out anti-Semitism from people that are blaming Jews for everything, because you're just putting yourself as the enemy and as part of the problem. And populism is the strongest when it comes to friend enemy distinction, right? You're either with us or you're against us. And so you can't fight the left was not a resurgent form of populism. The left's problems were an anti-establishment, Marxist philosophy and all of its sub categories and deviations, right? Like neo-Marxism, postmodernism mixed with Marxism, democratic socialism. These are all just forms of Marxism, right? That has a long history in over the last 200 years. What you're seeing on the right is a brand new form of populism that is willing to be a bull in a china shop and fuck up a whole bunch of shit because the system is in many ways irrevocably broken.
Yeah, so this is like when I referenced that kind of like analogy of building blocks earlier, right? And when in using that same analogy, when I critique what the left became, my problem with it was is that like you have the nationalist layer, and then you have the natural rights modern political theory layer, and then they tried to stack postmodernism, Marxism, whatever you want on top of it, but it wasn't
Hmm.
compatible. It tried to go down and eat the structure, right? It tried to eat everything. You
Hmm.
can't have a nationality. You can't have an in group. These natural rights you're talking about are ridiculous. Like it cannibalized everything. And what I'm
Yeah.
seeing on the right is the beginnings of the same problem where maybe not all the way down, because at least they want to keep the national layer, but they're willing to give up the middle layer, kind of like the natural rights, these kind of hard won moral truths, in order to
Yeah.
achieve short term political goals, which is kind of a hallmark of socialism. And
I
I
disagree. I
don't know
think
how
they're
to
trying to
I don't know how to
repair.
sway them from course. I'm not sure I'm a good messenger for them because I'm, like I said, disaffected from the left, right? Like I don't know
Yeah.
who would be
Well,
a good
I was
messenger
a
for them.
communist. I was a communist, so there's hope yet that you can
Yeah,
become an ANCAP. I've gone far farther than you, and I started far farther
isn't it
from you.
funny? Thomas
Uh,
Sowell was a Marxist also, right? So there's like I think there's a rich tradition of
when you are a high IQ, disaffected, rebellious, angry young man, Marxism is fucking such. It's such a siren's call to that group of people, um, because it gives you someone to blame as opposed to your own
yeah,
inadequacies. It allows you to point the finger. And when you're young, especially when you're a young man, I think every young man, maybe not these days because Gen Z's fucking T levels are fucking below the floor. But sorry, guys. All right. But like most young men, especially ones that came from fucked up backgrounds, you are like, I cannot, like, there's so much rage. There's so much anger if you come from a place where you've really struggled, right? And like, you know, I had a narcissistic, and I mean narcissistic as in full blown malignant narcissist, abusive stepfather that did shit like mug my mother, in the middle of the night and then come back home and then be her and pretend that he had no idea that she was mugged so that she would feel unsafe in the neighborhood so that she
Jesus,
could so that she would then move because he wanted to move and he wanted to isolate her from having too many friends and family and people that she had established in the area so that she could further feed his narcissistic supply. Like, I came from a man that would use subtle ways to get my mother to beat me so that she would then feel guilty about being a bad mom and so that I would then turn to him as my hero because he saved me from my mother that was beating me so that he could then be the hero to both people despite the fact that he orchestrated the situation. And on top of that, I came from poverty. So I came from poverty, I came from abuse, I had a lot of trauma. I was a young man. I was fucking full of rage. And Marxism says these are the people to hate, and it gives you a finger to point at as opposed to an internal locus of control, right? Instead of like, and it's almost impossible given the circumstances I had at that time to be able to say this is my fault because it wasn't,
you just
right?
you and you
It
and
was
you
my
just
family.
you just said the magic words, right? And I think that story, it really tragic, is also like exactly indicative of how maybe the project needs to be an educational project because an internal locus of control is very hard to have with the shit that happened to you, by the way. Like most people
Mhm.
who have that kind of background have an external locus of control. But it,
Oh yeah, I'm so fucking lucky I'm not dead
oh
somewhere
my
or a
God.
drug addict or
But
something.
also an
You know what I mean?
internal,
Like I got problems, boys. I still got problems. You know what I mean? And on top of that, I have a fucking rare genetic disorder and a fucking autoimmune disease. I'm so fucking lucky to be alive right now,
yeah.
guys.
Well, but if you, in spite of all that, if you can cultivate an internal locus of control, that's basic. I mean, let's not get univariate, but like if you had to pick one thing to teach someone and that was going to work and make them successful all through their life, it would be that
Hmm.
and like delaying gratification. Those
Well,
two, yeah,
that's why I said, and those two things are essential components to martial arts.
yeah.
That's why I brought it up. I said that's why I said nothing will make you conservative quicker than martial arts. Not fake shit, okay? Right. I took martial arts as a kid, but I took Ishinru. It's
Yeah.
like basically fucking fancy karate. It was retarded. But I mean, I learned how to throw a punch. I mean, that's about the only thing it taught me. I did a lot of dumb katas that weren't helpful. But I mean, you get someone in mixed martial arts or in Brazilian jiu-jitsu or in judo or in taekwondo or in Muay Thai or in boxing. I think these are kind of the big ones where they're real and you actually learn something and you can be humbled, right? Um, you will never get past a blue belt unless you go to some place that hands out belts for cash and like candy. Um, or green belt or brown. It depends on what
Mhm.
how the belts are, but you get what I mean. Like you're never going to go above like a mid belt unless you learn an internal locus of control and you learn delayed gratification. You have to learn that okay, I have to train to be better and I have to recognize that it's my fault that I'm not succeeding.
Yeah. And it's my fault, even if the reasons that it makes it look like it's not your fault are quite compelling and good. And in fact, like maybe even in a scenario where if you were being as objective as possible, it's not your fault. Because like that's actually the trick to it. It's why when you see like all these crazy Michael Jordan interviews where he's
Mm.
saying, I took it personally. What's he doing? He's making it about him. He's making it about how dedicated he needs to be. Because if you believe that, you have the best chance, even if it on some level isn't 100% true. And
Well, and that's also basically what defeated communism and forced critical theory to exist was one book, and there was that idea, right? Alexander Solzhenitsyn's
amazing
Gulag
book.
Archipelago,
Yeah.
which, by the way, nobody talks about the other book he wrote that is banned in America, and you can't get anywhere in America unless you get a PDF copy from someone, which is 200 years together because it talks about the Jews. But it's actually a good book, and it's not as fucking anti-Semitic as people claim. But you should read it. Actually, just please don't go down that rabbit hole too far, guys.
Oh, and
But
but
it
by
is a
the
good
way,
book. But
if you
it's
read Solzhenitsyn, I beg you to get the abridged editions. If you get the like the long edition, it's just like thousands of pages of like inside Russian politics that will not have a good reference point.
this is an ANCAP fucking stream, okay? Overwhelmingly, these boys got through Atlas Shrugged, and they're all autistic, and okay, like fucking, they'll be fine. Okay, from some of you may need the abridged version, but I know some of you are good. You just heard that and you were like, "There's a bigger version." Fuck, I bought the
the
wrong one.
the abridged version's like 900 pages long, so don't feel bad about it.
Yeah, but I mean that's the basic argument behind the Gulag Archipelago is I should take personal responsibility for what occurred and stop pointing the finger, right? And the culmination of that, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember the exact quote. Maybe you do. I don't feel like googling it right now. Sorry, grokking it. I gotta stop googling it because Google's fucking useless. But is that the line between good and evil runs through the middle of the heart of man. If only it were so easy to point out the evil and be able to dismiss it or some shit like that. But who would cut out a piece of their own heart, right? And like that is the message, the final kind of message that defeats communism in throughout all of history, that forces them to run from communism, create critical theory at the Frankfurt School, and reevaluate everything. Is one fucking book with one concept that says, "What if it's your fucking fault?
Well,
What if it's you?"
and then the other great line, just because it made everyone so furious when he became an icon in the West, and it just made everyone so angry when he started saying this. But he said, if I had, I'm paraphrasing, but if I had to summarize what happened in the Soviet Union, men forgot God. That's why this happened. And the crazy thing about that line is it's this idea going back to negative positive rights that if you have a clear sense of what your values are and you know
Mhm.
what the hierarchy looks like and you know what's on top and you know that's not the state, a lot of stuff that happens that is proposed by like a socialist or by the Soviets is intolerable reflexively because like, wait a minute, it's not up to you to decide whether or not I have natural right. That's not up to you. That, like, if, in fact, the fact that you want to get rid of them is the problem. And that's why in Soviet legal theory, they were really pushing the idea that the state is actually where all the rights reside. And human rights are things the state applies against the people. It's not the other way around because
Yeah, I mean,
it has to be the top rank in the hierarchy
if
in
you
order to get away with that sort of tyranny.
Ironically, the person that understood this best is Antonio Gramsci in Prison Papers, right? Which is a set of papers that are veiled, right? And then he kind of like writes about them later when he gets out of prison. But he's a full blown Marxist, describing how Marxism needs to take over the world, and he's in many ways the is the inspiration behind George Lukács, right? Who you may know from Marxian terms like reification, right? The concept of turning turning interpersonal relationships into commodities under capitalism, in Marxian theory and philosophy. And many of his understudies are the individuals that go and are big members at the Frankfurt School of creating critical theory, right? So, why is critical theory created is in many ways can be tied to Antonio Gramsci. And the biggest failure of Marxism was, he argues, is that there are these pillars that create the reactionaries. Now we use the term reactionaries often wrong today because it has the term reaction in it, and so it's become a kind of common parlance to say that you're reacting to something, therefore you're a reactionary. But reactionary is a Marxian term that means someone that is that will that automatically has like disgust or action or reaction, right, to the proletariat attempting to overthrow or have a revolution, or someone that reacts to critical consciousness, or in the Marxian sense class consciousness, as it attempts to engage in them. And what he basically said is, there are these institutions, and unless we can subvert these institutions, Marxism is going to be a really, really, really tough sell in most places. And those institutions were religion, family.
Hmm.
Were two of them. I don't remember all of the pillars, but it was religion, family, racial solidarity, and like one or two other ones. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. I
The
apologize. It's been
entire
a while
bottom
since I've
layer.
read.
When I was talking about the bottom layer, it's everything on the bottom layer you just named.
Right. And so the Marxists understood this. And so it becomes very interesting to me when you read Weber in the Frankfurt School, that is saying, how ought we conduct science? And this is how deep Marxism goes into our culture, because this is one thing that I think so many people miss and misunderstand just how infected with Marxist philosophy we are. Is look at any research paper at all: psychology, sociology, economics, behavioral economics, neuroscience, maybe not neuroscience, but any social sciences. And what you will find is they isolated and controlled for variables. What are those variables? Socioeconomic status, class. One of the other variables is race. One of the other variables is age. One of the other variables is gender. But for some reason, you never, ever, ever see, let's say we're talking about spanking children study, right? They never break people down by religiosity. They never break. Why? Isn't that an insanely huge factor in how a person values the world and sees the world? They took his advice, and they recognized that religion was the strongest pillar, and that science should ignore religion. Not just ignore religion as in religion is wrong, but that data and that all of the scientific studies we do should isolate religion as a meaningless thing. They talk and theorize about this, how it's an unuseful metric, and they make all these cope arguments. Weber makes a lot of them, in that same, while in the same breath talking about the Protestant work ethic. That's a term Weber fucking invented, right? And religiosity is just completely ignored in all of your science. And so, and it's like, it's a huge co-founding variable. Unless it's like sociology of religion or something of religion, they'll ignore it. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right that there are these pillars. Now, I disagree. I think ultimately Christianity and religion needs to go by the wayside. I think it actually it actually births socialism. And I would argue that socialism is made possible through Christianity, as opposed to a better philosophy that is actually anti-socialist. But it's like way down my list of problems. And I do agree with you that full blown socialism is often hits, is buttressed against Christianity in many ways. But yeah, no, I agree with that to some extent, at least in that base philosophy of like who we are and where do rights come from. You have to erode that in order to implement socialism, and
Yeah.
that's what critical theory is designed to do.
So like
That's
I put this.
why critical race theory exists. That's like whiteness and things like that. It's why class. I mean, like it's designed to undergird this. That's why churches right now are being deeply invaded by socialists and by leftists, and that's why they're trying to create new state religions and secular religions that are based off of critical theory and things of that nature. Like the problem is a lot deeper than people realize.
And this is, if you look at my Twitter handle, the reason I say American deist is I'm a deist, but which is different than me. I've been told I'm also a bare theist. So that if you care about religious philosophy in the audience, but the idea there is basically, to be simple, I believe in God, and then I'm agnostic beyond that. So particular claims of miracles or revelations are things that I find interesting, but I don't know that I can ascribe to. But what's useful about that framework is when you read something like the Declaration of Independence, and Jefferson says, you know, nature's God, natural rights, these things we believe are inalienable. That becomes a foundational axiom at that point, right?
Yeah,
And
I
because,
just think I have a better one,
yeah,
but I
yeah,
agree it is a foundational
I'm not trying to
axiom for
convince you,
sure,
but
right? And
what
it's like
I'm,
the socialists can't say, yeah, I agree.
yeah.
Sorry, I
So
apologize.
I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to convince you to join the flock. What I'm more saying is, when you offer the foundational axiom in some kind of educational program that focuses on internal locus of control, maybe focusing on young men, whatever the case may be, and then you build off of that, that's your plot armor, right? That's when you get
Mhm.
exposed down the road, like
That's your plot armor is
yeah,
such a wild thing to say. You're not wrong. I
no,
just thought that was funny.
it's absolutely right? Because it's like if you look
These are
at,
the eagles that come in and save.
yeah, well, I mean, you told your story, and like like literally, I was a teacher, so I was in teacher training programs, and teacher training programs are 90% ideological instruction, I would say. Like, I mean, I
Mhm.
even remarked on it. I didn't know what I was remarking on, but when I was in undergrad, because I didn't study very hard in undergrad, and I took a lot of really hard philosophy classes.
A
So
lot of people don't need
yeah,
to. Undergrad's a fucking joke.
so my GPA
High school
in like
2.0.
philosophy classes was pretty bad. My GPA in like teacher training courses was a 4.0 because all you had to do was repeat the buzzwords. If you just learned what the
Mhm.
buzzwords were and repeated them, you got an A. That was the test. Um, so, yeah, but still left that with kind of enough of a sense of the world intact that when I contacted better philosophy, better legal writing, better political theory down the road, there was something for it to stick to, right? And then, of course,
Mhm.
had kids, which is the ultimate conservative act. But so I do think there's something to this, right? Where it's
Yeah,
like, well,
that made me a lot more socially conservative. Is the moment I had a son, and it had some effect. I'm gonna be honest, having a daughter like really hit. It was like, oh
oh
shit.
yes, oh yeah, you suddenly think about a lot of things. But my point is,
Yeah.
maybe I think you might have convinced me that like I've been very focused on national debt as an issue of mine because it drives me fucking crazy because it's going to ruin us. But maybe the focus is this educational point and deregulation because there's no party that's actually even remotely interested in the debt. So that's just not like it's just not I don't see a
That's
pathway
that's it
towards it.
too. You know what I mean? Well, because there's only one way to solve the debt, and that's to get rid of Social Security. Listen, 61% of the federal budget is entitlement spending and welfare. Okay, that's it. 61% of the federal budget is entitlements and welfare. Okay, 13% is the debt. So 74% of the entire federal budget is welfare of some form, right? Whether it be corporate welfare, a very small portion of that is like treaty things like NATO is an entitlement, right? But overwhelmingly, well over 50% is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, TANF, those forms of welfare. And so when we're talking about the debt and they're like, well, we got to cut defense spending, or, oh, we got to make sure the DMV is running a little better with new computer systems. All of that shit is 26% of the debt. Or sorry, 26% of of our federal budget. So no one's tackling the fucking debt unless they're saying we must cut Social Security. If they don't say that, everything they say about the debt is fucking meaningless.
Yeah,
That's just the reality. Before COVID, the Congressional Budget Office said that by 2050, if everything remained equal before COVID, right, where we added like another $10 trillion in debt, that we were going to be $121 trillion in debt by 2050. Like,
it's
that's it. That's it.
it's a nightmare, and the problem with it is, like, I mean, and again, this is like really going from first principles rather than being in the weeds, but to me, from like a million miles up, you talk about a debt that's ballooning at the rate you're talking about. How do you get rid of a debt that size? Well,
You don't.
you you can go to war with the people you owe the money to. That's one
Problem
option.
is with that is that China is no longer the number one holder of our debt. They've sold off most of our debt slowly, and it's now Japan that is the number one foreign owner of our
That,
debt. We're not going to war with
but
Japan,
that's what I
and
mean.
China
Like,
knows that's one way to solve it, and that's why they're
yeah,
selling off our debt.
so yeah, default and become a rogue nation is like option
Mm-hmm.
one. Option two is massively inflate your currency, right? Like, I mean, that's one thing that could happen. And the other one is like cut spending, but as we've talked about, that's not happening. So, you
Well,
know,
how do you massively? Well, see, here's the problem, right? Is that our entire fake economy, where we have nothing but adult daycare jobs, where most of the women in this country and a very significant portion of the men in this country are doing completely unproductive labor, but it's just GDP number go up, and then businesses get investment from hedge funds, and corporations just get things based off of numbers they put on a paper as opposed to actual productivity, is propped up by one thing. I will talk about it. I will never not talk about it. I will interrupt people to talk about it. I'm sorry, Ryan. Is the US petrodollar set up by Nixon. And you want to know why we bombed fucking Iraq? Because they wanted to we went to war in Iraq because they wanted to sell oil not on the US dollar but on euro to Europe. Why are we fucking involving ourselves with Iran? Because they're selling oil to China in the yuan. Why do we have fucking problems going on in Syria? Because they wanted to do pipelines and natural gas pipelines and sell oil in rubles, and they wanted to make sure that Iran and Syria and Germany had natural gas pipelines to make a competitive market that would go against the US dollar on the petrodollar. The fact of the matter is as of right now, we have somewhere around $2.9 trillion that is held by other nations, and this money is the only money they can use to buy oil. And so long as that is the case, if our currency inflates, their currency inflates because they have to use the US dollar to buy oil. And oil is the beginning of the production of literally everything that is productive that you make, because it's how you ship goods, you use oil. It's how you run factories, you use oil. Everything that is tangible is going to require oil as part of the global supply chain. And so we can massively inflate our currency. We absolutely can. And it will inflate everyone else's currency. And that's why we're not worried about the debt. But the problem is that the bigger that is, the bigger of a danger it is if countries stop using or selling oil in US dollars. And that's why we have to beat China. And that's why we are constantly at fucking war in Africa and the Middle East. It's got nothing to do with the Jews running the government. Because you know why? Because the fucking Jews in Israel and Saudi Arabia and us are somehow magically all three partners in starting all these bullshit wars, because that's what we do. Anytime some country is dumb enough to poke their head above the ground and say that they're going to sell oil in a currency that is in the US dollar, they are a threat to the world economy, and they are a threat to the US economy specifically. And so that's what we do. And that's why we can have $37 trillion in debt and climbing and still somehow not be that affected. But the moment that game stops, the moment China wins and Saudi Arabia, because here's another funny thing, that treaty ended in 2024, by the way. And the moment we start selling it in, to Brazil and BRICS and other things like that, is the moment that the US economy collapses.
well, and this is kind of a weird intersection point with populism, right? Because that is a very good argument for like classic hawkish conservatism, project American power, right? Because if you're saying we need to protect this interest to stop our economy from collapsing, that seems like a good reason to do it. But the
It's the
intersection,
opposite.
well, the intersection with
No, it's the
popular,
opposite. And even from Trump. Hey, why do you think Trump is talking about Greenland, Canada, deals with South America? Why do you think he's doing tariffs to try and grow domestic production? People don't realize that he's being, I'm not saying he's a genius or anything, but what he's really doing is seeing the writing on the wall that this game isn't going to last forever, and he has to establish the American empire as opposed to America being the world police trying to protect the petrodollar. He has to use tariffs and things like that now so that we have manufacturing in our country, so that we have control over South America and our regions in our area, so that we have maybe a naval base in Greenland or something like that. These are intentional. And why is he pulling out of NATO and pulling out of certain, right, like, and threatening to pull out of that? These are intentional acts of someone that understands that the game isn't going to last forever and that it's time to shore up what we have, so when that fucking mass inflation hits, we're actually producing shit and we actually have power within our region. Because China went from the Obama era to having something like 20% of the world trade to having like 60% of the world trade today. As much as China is a paper tiger in a lot of ways, we have it just as bad. And this game is not going to last forever.
yeah. And because this is an area where I don't have like deep factual knowledge, I kind of just want to probe a little bit to kind of see where you're coming from on this. What I was getting at was the risk that I was seeing based on what you were saying was almost like a timing problem, right?
Mm.
Like if you go full isolationist too fast, and
It
maybe,
breaks. Yeah.
yeah, it breaks before you set up an alternative. And if what you're saying is accurate, and I'm going to assume that but it's something I'll look into afterwards, that it would seem like we would need to protect that interest pretty vigorously until some alternative is online. Because if you have a gap in the middle, you're screwed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, like that. Why do you think this whole concept of like Israel is our greatest ally, right? It's like people don't understand that, and so the populists are coming from this perspective of like, oh, the Jews run the government because APAC and all this other shit. When the truth is that it is a symbiotic and I wouldn't even call it symbiotic. I would call it mutually parasitic, right? But like more so, right? Which is Israel is our dog and we are their dog, and it's because of the U.S. petrodollar. And there's a reason that we get involved in these. We get involved in these conflicts, and people are like, why are these neocons fucking trying to go into it never works. And the answer is it has worked every time. The Iraq-Afghanistan war was a resounding success. The wars and occupations in Syria was a resounding success. The destabilization and bombing of like supposed nuclear facilities, whatever level they were at, is a resounding success. Every one of these operations has been a success for the U.S. American empire because it has destabilized and crippled a nation that was a threat to the U.S. dollar by trading oil in different currencies. It's worked every time. And so, but the problem is that we keep getting in more and more debt, and you can only offshore so much debt before nations start going, well, maybe I'll trade with Brazil, or maybe I'll trade with this, or maybe China discovers something with the Belt and Road Initiative and, some oil reserves in an African nation, or maybe right. Like it requires more and more political power and financial power in order to maintain this game that kind of started with the Eisenhower Doctrine, but started in earnest when Nixon went off of the gold standard and we betrayed all of Europe because we had all of these like loan systems to Europe and all of this economic activity with the Warren Plan after the devastation from World War II. And we promised them this stable currency that was backed by gold. And then all of a sudden we're like, oops, fractional reserve banking. We actually don't have a bunch of gold to back that backs this up. We just have a fiat currency and we promise it's powerful because we have bombs. And people were like, what the fuck? That's not good enough. So then we tied the US dollar to oil transactions, and that backs it because the whole world is buying and selling these oil transactions. That's
And
why we don't drill our own oil.
I assume, by the way, that this is building on, this is in addition to, rather than fully supplanting like the other arguments, like, people say we're allies with Israel because they're the only Western style democracy in the region. They're the closest to our
I would
values.
I'll say
I don't think
this.
they're contradictory
I'll say this.
views.
What I will say this is anytime I'm talking about geopolitics, sociology, psychology, or anything that is in the realm of humans, I am never doing a univariate analysis.
Mm,
I'm only either talking about a primary cause and or a major cause.
okay.
Just never assume I'm doing a univariate analysis.
That's
And that's not an insult to you. I'm just repeating that for the audience because, yeah, I agree. There's a lot of other factors. I'm just kind of describing this economic
mhm.
factor insofar as we're talking about inflation and debt and how is it that we're $37 trillion in debt and yet we still have GDP growth, right? And like we can very quickly cut rates and get growth, and then we can very quickly rise rates and we can get like a standard inflation that isn't that bad. And then and like government bonds have gone from AAA to AA. It's like, how is that fucking possible? It doesn't make sense unless you factor in this fact that the entire world economy is tied to the US dollar through this.
So then, if we're talking about like, let's say the title of the stream, like project opposing socialism, right? The
Right.
question then is, do we have enough time? Because if you look at the debt as a ticking time bomb, and you look at
Mhm.
the petrodollar as a mitigating factor, as long as you can hold on to it, maybe we need some kind of long-term projects to have the next thing. Do we
Mhm.
have time to focus on something else in the meantime, like an educational initiative or deregulation as a focus? Or is the clock going to tick out before any of those could bear fruit?
I have no idea, but you can't fix one without fixing the other first. And the thing is that like let's say magical wand, right? We're able to unindoctrinate an entire generation of children and repurpose our education system in some way, be it centrally planned or opening up the market and deregulation, obviously my preference, right? So that philosophy burdens and we have more of a concept of natural rights and we have all of these things. Even if that bomb blows up, we are far more prepared to usher in a better society than if we had not done that. And so we can't get rid of the debt without fixing the philosophy and without a society of people that has better understanding of natural rights and better understanding of these economic factors. And so you might be right. It is likely maybe even that it's too late. But when that bomb blows up, when we get Weimar Republic fucking hyperinflation, how will the populace react? And if we've made no grounds in the philosophy, I'll tell you exactly what will happen. The government will institute central banking digital currencies and universal basic income through central banking digital currencies to prop up a new currency because the other has inflated and promise people that they're going to be able to get food and that they're going to be able to pay their rent and they're going to be able to survive so long as they adopt these new currencies. And these new currencies will be a mechanism of social control. And we will lose far more liberties than we currently have when this occurs in that process. But if we have a society that's resistant to that, and we have a society that is more that is crying out for freedom and deregulation, the answer is going to be let the fucking market fix this. Get the fuck out. You socialists fuck this up. That's why we're suffering right now. And what we're going to get is we're going to get Javier Milei in Argentina. We're going to have a country with skyrocketing poverty and a country that has 250% year over year inflation. And what has Malay accomplished by because it was at a breaking point? He's accomplished bringing 7.7 million people
Mhm.
into the middle class in the last quarter. He's accomplished, according to UNICEF, bringing 2.4 million children out of poverty. He's brought inflation year over year down from 250% down to 30% year over year inflation, and it shows no signs of stopping in terms of getting better. And he has cut government spending. He is privatizing industries that were nationalized. So like that's like if we have the philosophy right, when the collapse happens, I want to be Argentina.
Mhm. Yeah. So then the question then becomes, if we're just gaming this project out, right?
Mhm.
What does a pushback look like? That would be helpful. Because I mean, one of the trends that's happening now is that young men are increasingly conservative in
Mhm.
numbers that are kind of striking. But
They're
what I
they're increasingly fascist. I don't think they're increasingly conservative.
that's the problem, right? I think that
Yeah.
there's they to the extent that populism is the canary in the coal mine because it tells you that something is wrong. That's
Mhm.
interesting. But when if you get into a world where basically you have a gender split between two political parties, that's almost a
Mhm.
worst case scenario because that's never going to be productive. It's just going to be a pendulum swing between fascism and socialism, which is really, I don't want to say the worst thing that could happen, but it's close. It's really that's a very bad outcome. So the question then is like, what kind of interventions would be even helpful at this point? Because when I've been on the streams, I've done the circuit now a little bit, and it's almost impossible to have a conversation that's not about the politics of the day, and is one
Mhm.
more like this, where you're like, well, how do we look forward and try to make society better, and not make this like, how much do you hate or love Donald Trump? Can we talk about something else for a second and try to focus on a plan? There's not a huge appetite for it. So I don't know. I'm trying to chart that path and looking for ideas. Maybe you have some.
I wish I was more white pilled. I wish I had more positive policy prescriptions to say, right? Like I think, and maybe this is the objectivist in me, insofar as there is an objectivist in me, because I'm far more of an ANCAP than an objectivist. Shit, whatever. I'll pick it up later. I dropped something. It doesn't matter. But I think change probably happens from a few philosophers, and that and we're probably going to have rubble. We're going to have smoke and ash. We're going to have it all blow up in our face, and we're going to have to hope that we've pushed enough and made enough philosophers and people in the domain to be able to have the right solutions to rebuild from the rubble. And I'm not saying, we're all going to die in a nuclear winter type shit, right? But I'm saying, I don't know that we'll get much change until we get like hyperinflation and like extreme volatility and riots everywhere, and like a nation that's teetering on destabilization. And then when something crazy comes in, we have to hope that that crazy isn't fascism or a communist dictator, right? We have to have enough of our foot in, like in the door, to where we get a Javier Milei instead of those other two. And so that means preaching the philosophy in a lot of ways. I would say, in terms of this teetering and this gender differences, um, I look at this from a Marxist dialectical materialist perspective, right? Which is doing a Marxian analysis. His theory is, the like socialism is just like the current state of things. It's a movement of peoples, according to Engels, right? And so you see this. I do think that they're kind of right, to a certain degree, in that what ends up happening is you get this boiling point, right? And and then you get a society that wrongly tries to create a thesis and an antithesis, and then creates a synthesis. Where they are coping massively is in in their own Marxian analysis, is that's exactly what fascism was. It is socialism at its most deepest core, it is the most perfectly socialist model that has ever existed, which was a thesis and an antithesis, and then a synthesis of those two ideas, right? I mean, the largest labor union ever created per capita was the DAP, the German work, right? In Germany. You had the factory beautification, you had the strength through joy program. It was all these socialist programs while also having these pro-social family, centrally planned, dominating authoritarian, dictates on their own people, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why fascism tends to heal quicker than than does communism. And so there's a bit of a white pill there in that that fascism and Nazism fell and liberal democracy rose from the ashes. And there's also a bit of a black pill in that denazification is really just how can we make liberal democracies more socialist? In a lot of ways, the history of social welfare programs and higher taxes on the wealthy and all of these things, they go in tandem with denazification. Denazification in Europe is one of the major reasons why Europe is so much more socialist than America, because we didn't go through nowhere near the denazification that they went through, and we fortunately routed out a lot of the communist KGB spies in the State Department and in the Treasury Department, and and the journalists, and we had the House Committee on House Un-American Activities Committee, and we had Joe McCarthy, and many of these people had to hide, and we had a stronger foundation than the kind of crippled Europe. But socialism is so strong in Europe because of denazification, because it was that same Marxist historical narrative of oh, we created, now we have this new antithesis, which is Nazism, and we have this thesis of democracy, and then they synthesized those two, and the denazification created social democracy, right? Democratic socialism and things of that nature. So it's a bit of a white pill and a black pill, is that we can come back from this, but we have to be very careful that we don't get closer and closer to the socialist hellscape as we do that. And I think the way that we do that is with pockets of philosophers, little areas like New Free State Project in New Hampshire, Prospera in Honduras. It failed, unfortunately, because the communists were able to, put new people on their Supreme Court and then violate national treaties in Honduras. And they should be bombed to oblivion for that, because we had an anarcho-capitalist society that was flourishing there, that was doing great things, and but and in teaching that philosophy. So that's what I focus on. I focus on teaching the philosophy. I focus on trying to get these ideas. I focus on undergirding some of these things. And I focus on trying to slip into that populist uprising and catch whatever minnows I can in this school of fish and bring them towards our side, so that we are better prepared when a collapse happens, that we don't just accept denazification. When the collapse happens and the fascist gets elected and then denazification comes in, we go, no, fuck you. We want it. We want to get rid of the socialism. And in
See,
many ways, it may be an eternal fight.
denazification is a bit of a weird term because it's such an umbrella term in some ways, and it can mean a lot of things. But just to pick at one thing that I think falls within the ambit of it, that's interesting,
Mm-hmm.
is that in a society that increasingly lost a common moral framework, in post World War II, we could all agree that racism was bad, right? Like that became like you could punch a Nazi. That was the one thing everyone agreed on. And
Yeah, I don't think you should punch a Nazi, but yeah, I
yeah,
get
but
it.
but,
I mean,
but
a
that's
real Nazi that fought, punch
yeah.
them. You know what I mean? Fuck them, kill them. I don't care. But like, a person that adopts that ideology, I don't think it's
Well,
justified
but
to
it's
punch them.
but it's
Well,
interesting
actually, it
because
is until they recant. But
like
that gets
if
really deep into
I
it.
if I go on X, I'm thinking of like the accounts that like hate follow me. If I go on X and I say something about a limited federal government, the thing that's going to follow is somebody saying, "Oh, well, you want to repeal X, Y, and Z thing that has some great effect," and they're going to appeal to that because that's the thing that they assume is, even though we obviously have different moral axioms, is going to be something that can't possibly be spoken against. Because if I do anything that they could then say was racist in their mind. That's supposed to be the only moral axiom that we do agree on, right? Like, so there
Mhm.
does seem to be something to that where I don't disagree. Like, racism is wrong. So it's not like it's not like I disagree with it, but there's something odd that happened where that became a moral third rail, but socialism, communism didn't. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
We learned to punch the Nazis,
our
we didn't learn to punch the communists. And I don't quite know how that happened.
yeah, I mean that's what happened with denazification.
Mhm.
So first and foremost, you have to recognize that Winston Churchill and Truman were, deeply allied with Soviet Russia and Stalin, right?
Mhm.
Despite the fact that Soviet Russia allied with the Germans and engaged in the Katyn massacre in Poland, and had defensive pact like the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, right? Like they eventually, Hitler, went against Germany, so then they came to be with us, and we bled the European front, and to a certain extent the Pacific, so that we could funnel as many resources towards the Soviets. Now, to be fair, the Soviets were the ones doing most of the dying. That was where most of the troops were occurring, right? And so, I mean, I don't know how much of a bad
They did
strategy that
more than
is,
their fucking
from
share, yeah.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Like I won't discount that. Like that's where a lot of the physical people were dying, right? Um, and of course, obviously, there was a lot of. I think probably it's hard to know because we'll never get these documents declassified. But I mean, once we broke Germany's Enigma code, once Alan Turing broke the Enigma code, and we were able to listen in on Nazi communications and their war plans, I feel like there's a high probability that we funneled money to Russia to make Russia a bigger threat so that we could pull troops away so that we could initiate more in the Pacific and more in, plan D-Day and the Norman invasion, or reconquering Normandy, and some of the northern African conflicts and things like that, which obviously those didn't pan out as well, for like full-blown invasions. But I do think that some of that was probably a thing that we just don't know about. Nevertheless, once the war is over, right, and we're splitting things with the Russians, we had a lot of communist sympathies in all of our governments. Communism was not like before the Berlin Wall fall, before the Iron Curtain, right, in the 60s falls, right? We had no idea how bad communism was. It was fairly excusable to be a communist, okay? Because while morally and ethically, if you have a foundation in philosophy, you know that it's wrong, right? I mean, fucking Bakunin was destroying communism, like right as it occurred, right? Like I'm not saying that like there isn't that, but like nobody had seen the gulags. Nobody had seen that like Lysenkoism and Soviet policies were leading to starvation. Nobody knew about what was happening to the kulaks, right?
Mhm.
Or it hadn't occurred yet, right? But so there's that, right? Nobody really knew that like Jews were being forcibly spread throughout Siberia and the rest of the country, so that because Stalin saw like too much synagogue as a threat to the party. Like nobody really saw some of the political infighting and assassinations. There's a lot of evil shit that's happening that nobody really knows about. Number one, and number two, the domino effect thing wasn't a real thought at that point, right? It's not until like McCarthy's time, it's not until like the 50s where all of a sudden a third of the fucking world falls to communism. Instead, it's an isolated thing in Russia, and it's a burgeoning thing in China and a few other territories in Eastern Europe as part of the denazification, right? But like the USSR, not Russia, right? It's in the USSR, and it's like the nationalists are fighting the good fight against the communists in China, and they're kind of equal right now. And so what we did is, as allies that were working together, and it's also important to know that the State Department was heavily communist. The OSS, the precursor to the CIA, was full of communists, some of whom were actual Moscow agents, and right, and some of them were just ideologically communist. and there was a lot of communist sympathies in America. And the Treasury Department, Dexter White, for example, he intentionally diverted $200 million in money in 1949 or something away from the Chinese nationalists and to the Chinese communists. Like that alone, we might not have ever have lost China to communism. And so the denazification of Europe, especially of the Eastern Bloc, but also, Germany and Italy and all these other places, we came up with plans with Russia. And so what we did is we said, oh, we have to strengthen democratic institutions. We need more democracy. We need more that. And so there wasn't a return to the European tradition of classical liberalism. There was a mixture, a synthesis from a Marxist perspective of that European liberal democracy but also of like all these strong democratic institutions and there's a whole I'm paraphrasing a lot of fucking history, right? There's a whole world of shit that's going on in that. And so that is why we have so much socialism in Europe, is because we worked with the communists to rebuild the institutions of Germany and the institutions of Italy and the institutions of the entire Eastern Bloc, until they ended up basically taking them over. Large swaths of European countries were rebuilt to be more socialist because that was the compromise with Soviet Russia, was creating socialism in Europe, and then massive propaganda against racism and massive propaganda against white identitarianism or white families or any of these potentially pro-social, potentially Nazi things, right? There's a gray area in some degrees, right? Like how Nazi is it to be proud of your white heritage, right? Like there's a line where it kind of gets creepy, and then there's a line where it's perfectly healthy. And so yeah, that would be my argument. But nevertheless, there is still somewhat of a white pill, which is that we did get liberal democracies and things like
Yeah.
that back from
But
fascism.
but that also tees up like the next generation, which is, the kind of the people who were raised by those people with that framework who turned out to be hippies, right? And then in the
Yep. Yep.
1960s created
Yep.
the current crop of college professors, which it kind of loops us back to the beginning, which is like, well,
And
why?
what did we get? What did the
Yeah,
hippies bring in once they got into power? What did the boomers bring in? Oh, we need more student loans. We need a
yeah.
bigger expansion of the GI Bill. We need bigger expansion of healthcare.
And then
All of the socialism that we're suffering under can be directly tied to World War II and denazification propaganda that occurred in America that the Soviets pushed concepts like that harm reduction, concepts like democracy is beautiful, not necessarily individual liberty, right? Concepts like the poor need to be taken
can
care
we
of.
zoom in on
Many of
that
these
one for a
socialist things
second?
occurred.
Because
Yeah.
that I think is the one. That's the one that took me the longest to get to, and I think it's a really tough one, which is democracy is beautiful because it appears of our options that we've tried to be the best at defending natural rights, not because it's an end into and of itself. And it took me
Mhm.
forever to get to reach that point. And it took me forever to reach that point because there's this idea in kind of like, if you're talking like harm reduction circles, where it's like, if
Mhm.
everyone consents to it, that's good enough, right? That's the fact that people consent to it is the moral justification. But that's because
Well,
you're
the
already
fact that
within
51%.
this. Yeah, well, and I was reading like the Federalist Papers, right? And they
Mhm.
talk about their fear of the tyranny of the majority is like most of what they talk about. Like they're
Yes.
mostly afraid of
Yes.
faction
That's why
capture
the
and
Senate. That's why the Senate exists.
yeah,
That's why the presidency exists. That's why the Supreme Court exists.
be
All three of those institutions are to stop the tyranny of the majority
yeah, because a pure
and
democracy at
federalism.
the scale they were contemplating would be nightmarish for anyone who wasn't in the 51%. So you have to put all these checks in to ensure that the government won't overstep. And that, like, one of the things that lesson took me forever. And it
Mhm.
only happened because I went to law school and suddenly had to learn fucking federalism and civics. Like
Yeah.
the idea that you shouldn't be so focused on the federal government and should be much more focused on your local government Didn't even
Mhm.
occur to me until law school because it wasn't talked about. Nobody talks about local politics. Everyone talks about national
Well, how
politics.
old are you?
I'm in my 40s.
Okay, yeah. So you probably were a kid, but you still remember. I don't really remember it, but I mean, like, we also had another major shift with like Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton,
Hmm.
right? Where we kind of did start to go back towards a local politics, but instead of it being a local politics for the sake of local politics became national politics. And I think that is another shift in kind of our downward spiral is, Newt Gingrich recognizing, oh, we've got to win Senate seats and a few Senates. Well, how do we win Senate seats? Oh, well, we need to focus on governor races because once we get the governor and once we make the RNC fund and national ad campaigns fund these governor races and make this governor race very important, well, then we can gerrymander the district so we can get more House representative members and we can get more, so, more likely to get it, the Senate, and we can
Hmm.
change the states so that we can change the national electorate. And then, of course, Democrats very quickly picked up on the game that he was putting forward, and then it just became a thing. So now, not only is it local, like we have a focus on local politics, but the focus on local politics is through the frame of national politics. Nobody fucking talks about governors being important for Ohio. They talk about governors because is it a Republican or is it a Democrat? How many governors are Republican and how many governors are Democrat? It's a fight for federal elections now.
Well, and to give you like the little bit of the white pill, I think about something Gibbs said to me once, actually,
Oh
where
God.
yeah, it's so funny, man, because
I love Gibbs,
I
but
love
he's
Gibbs,
he's a
but
wild
like
one.
he was a funny messenger for this. But somebody asked him like, "Would you ever vote for a Democrat?" And he was like, "Of course, but not nationally." Like, if you ask me, if I go to a local election and there's two guys on the ballot, it's Bob and Kevin. You know, Bob's a Democrat, Kevin's not, but Kevin's an asshole. I drink with Kevin. I know who Kevin is. Kevin shouldn't be in charge of fucking anything. I'm not voting for Kevin, right? And like, that's the beauty of when democracy actually works, when it's local and you know the people and they have some commonality of moral center with you because they're from your community. Um, or if you talk to people from New Hampshire, where like their representatives have to have jobs because they don't pay them, and so they're in the community. They're people who work there, and if you don't like, and
Yeah,
you get voted out real quick if you're not responsive. It's a different thing when it's local,
there's
and
this quote. I don't know the original source, but there's this quote I pull up. It's which I find to be very kind of speaking to what you're speaking of. This quote does not represent me, chat. I am a fucking anarchist always. But with my family, I'm a communist. With my close friends, I'm a socialist. At the state level of politics, I'm a Democrat. At higher levels, I'm a Republican. And at federal levels, I'm a libertarian. Right. And I think it's the closer the politics are to you, the more control you're willing to give them, the more sharing you're willing to do, right? It's that kind of heat map kind of situation, right? Like in my family, everybody is equal. And I think this actually speaks to a certain degree of the problem of women voting, right? I think women voting was one of the biggest mistakes we ever made as a country. Though I don't think anyone should be voting. It's not like I particularly have a hatred towards women. I just think women vote socialist like a motherfucker. Um, and one of the biggest problems with that is that the female domain of control and power is reputation management and equality. Like that is the natural tendency of women is to enforce equality, right? And that's a really really important thing in your church, in your local community, and in your family, right? When you have male leaders in power, it's important that the women are there to shame the men, to not forget the disabused, to not forget that, like, hey, Bob's a good man, Bob's just on hard times right now, you should help out Bob, right? And it's also important for the woman to make sure that, like, the youngest kid gets enough food to make it through the winter, right? And that like the family members don't abuse each other and have that kind of nurturing aspect of equality that like protects and isolates the child so that they can grow up in a certain way before the harsh realities of the world really start to fucking hit them as they grow. These are really really important dynamics in interpersonal relationships and in small communities. But the concept of enforcing equality at the political level is the most dangerous and destructive ideology or idea that has ever been instituted, because equality is a myth. Once we get to reality, we realize that people have subjective values and people have different skills. And so long as people value things differently and people have different skills, there will never be equality no matter what. It is a complete myth. And it is also a myth that people deserve because they don't have. Some people deserve to starve to death. Some people deserve to die of thirst. I'm sick and fucking tired of my taxes going to build a well in some African village after they destroyed the last 6 wells we built for them. Like, all we are doing is enabling them and and stealing from people so that we can enable them to never grow and to never progress. The fact of the matter is that you should give to people because you value people, because they bring something back to you or to your community. And I think the feminine domain, having entered politics, is really what Marxism and socialism is at its core. It is because we all have feminine, traits and characteristics and energy, however you want to describe it, as well as masculine.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting topic. I want to ask, I guess, two questions. So then the first one is setting aside the
It's getting
morality.
late and we're going wild. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Fuck it. I'm here for it.
setting aside the morality of the issue, right? For the moment, as a
Mhm.
practical matter, the cat's out of the fucking bag, right? Like, I mean, that's never getting walked back for the simple reason, even if it was moral to walk it back, which I wouldn't concede. If you're gonna walk it, if you were to walk back women's rights to vote, you would have to do that through
Well, it's not a right.
democracy, and you can't because
Voting can never be a right. Just to be clear, right? We already
oh no,
established this difference between positive
oh yeah,
and
yeah,
negative
yeah. I,
rights,
I,
right?
I agree. Voting
So
is not a natural right. I agree with you. But like,
for sure.
my question is, like, practically speaking, that's not happening. So since that's not happening, what are the alternatives? Because this is what I was getting at earlier, where I'm seeing a worrying gender gap in the way people vote, which I think is a symptom of something akin to what you're identifying. But
It's socialism.
I don't know.
Socialism is creating this.
But what's the solution to that, right? Because the solution isn't going to be taking away women's rights to vote. It's just even if that was the solution, it's not going to be the solution. So what is it like?
Well, I
What
mean, first and foremost, I get what you're saying. In the here and now, that's not a fucking thing that is going to get voted on by 3/4 of states and 2/3 of the fucking Congress, right? Because it requires a constitutional amendment,
never
right?
happen?
We
Yeah, it will
can't,
never
like,
happen.
that's never fucking happening,
Yeah.
right? That being said, I wouldn't count it out as something that occurs in the future. I think gender dynamics are getting that bad. And here's the thing.
So you're saying like some kind of
Women's
revolutionary future is what you're positing.
I'm just saying, here's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that women are almost wholly unaware of the difference in violent power between themselves and men, and that every right that they have is is protected in reality. I'm talking about like a pragmatic reality. I'm not talking about from a moral domain. But every right that they have in reality is exists because men choose to allow them to have them. That's
A
it.
forced doctrine type argument. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like if men collectively decide that women's rights are no longer a thing, women can't do a fucking thing about it. It's not possible for them. Like, guns are not enough of a force multiplier for the amount of differences between men and women psychologically, physically, etc. Like in so many domains. So I wouldn't necessarily, like, if things get bad enough, that might be a reality. But working within your framework, right? Um, the gender differences, if we don't get rid of socialism, the gender differences will continue to get worse. And here's why. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, TANF, family court laws, all of these egalitarian forced concepts have destroyed gender differences between men and women. And the reason is because males lack the ability for resource accumulation or capital accumulation. Over 60% of the wealth in this country, or sorry, roughly 60% of the wealth in this country is stolen and given to the government. A majority of the money you make is given to the government in some way, shape, or form, right? I mean, look at Social Security and Medicare is 7.2%. It's not actually, or 7.1%. It's not actually 7.1%. It's actually 15.2% because your business has to pay match Social Security and Medicaid. So that's 15% before we even get to income tax. Then we have income tax, we have property tax. Then we have government spending that is getting increasingly out of control, and inflation is a form of taxation unless you already own property, and asset inflation increases your wealth. So the middle class young men, it is basically impossible for young men, unless they are diamonds in the rough, to go out, start a business, be successful, go and get a home by the time they're 25, 30. This is essentially impossible for almost every man out there. Meanwhile, who are the overwhelming recipients of welfare? Women. It is a massive transfer of wealth from men to women. On top of that, women make more money than men until they have a child. Work the same amount of hours, at the same job. Women make more money than men until children. Now, part of that correlates with age, right? Because women have, their youth and their beauty, which tends to make them more marketable in the beginning, right? And men don't have that in the beginning, but women begin to lose it over time, right? And so men develop at a younger age the skills to compensate for it, and women often lag behind in developing the skills to compensate for the fact that at one point they will lose that beauty, which has some transactional value. And so you take all of these elements together, and what you have is, for every bit of socialism, you have money taken from young men and given to, especially to single moms, but given to women, given to them through divorce. Women overwhelmingly now own most of the homes in this country, right? Like, over and over and over again, what you have is the wealth is being transferred to women. And what you find is that women no longer find the majority of men attractive. We have what's called a chopped epidemic, right?
Yeah.
All these dudes are ugly. And it's not because they're ugly, it's because what is traditionally attractive is resource accumulation and competence. And all of these women are now have all of the social signals that they're more competent than their male peers, and that they're better at resource accumulation than their male peers. And that's because the entire system is designed for them to transfer wealth to them.
So, I mean, I think, I don't want to dwell on the deregulation piece, because I think we've already established and we agree on. So that's like step one. Step two, just kind of working within this framework, right? It made me think of I think it was years ago, where Jordan Peterson was talking about this, where he was talking about the need to create productive adventure, right? That there are risks worth taking, and that that this can be the
That's
adventure of your
destroyed by
lifetime.
socialism. Yeah.
Well, exactly, because but it's also and yeah, socialism, and also this kind of harm reduction principle, because if you don't want your kids to go take a risk, you don't want them to fall down, right? But what we need then,
Good
just
night,
kind of
Trail.
working within the framework that you were laying out, would be a method by which young men, and I say this as a former elementary school teacher, our current ed- elementary school system, and I think beyond elementary school as well, is very feminine in the way that it's organized. Like, there's, if you're a rambunctious young boy, is
Yeah.
90% of the behavioral problems in a school. There are girls who are also problems. So I'm not saying 100%, but it's a lot of them, because the system isn't really set up to work with that sort of personality. But
Yeah. I mean,
that
it's a
but
bunch
that
of
could
things. There's
change,
no
right?
men
You
around.
could do that differently. Like, do you ever read the book Iron John?
No. Iron John.
Yeah, Iron John. It's just a great book about essentially, like, rites of male passage in various
Mm-hmm.
societies, and the mythos
Mm-hmm.
around it. And one of them that I loved was, like, in like certain Viking tribes, they would have this. It was called laying in ashes. So, like, you'd be a young man, you'd be a kid, you'd play, and then you'd be an adolescent. And like all adolescents, you were just a useless pile of shit. You were just
Right.
fucking awful. And they
You're
had to
eating
feed
more than
you.
anybody else.
Yeah,
You're
you didn't
fucking.
fucking
You're
contribute
fucking.
anything.
Your
You were fucking
labor's useless.
pimples.
You're not skilled at
Yeah,
anything.
you
You're fucking
can't.
horny and
Yeah,
distracted.
you're horny.
You're
You
fucking
can't attract
useless.
women because you're not fucking good at anything. So why would a woman want you? Like,
Right.
so you're that dude, right? And they had this thing called laying in ashes, where, like, in the in the communal house, the fire's in the center, right? And that's what's keeping everyone's warm. And if you were an adolescent boy, you could lay down next to the fire in the fucking ashes, which means you're covered in soot and dirty all the fucking time. And you could stay there as long as you want. And as long as you stay there, You have no obligations. Everybody's going to feed you. You don't owe anything to the society. You're good. You're a useless adolescent. We get what you're doing. One day you're going to wake up and wash yourself off and say, I'm not sleeping in the fucking ashes anymore. I want a bed.
Mm.
At that point, you have to earn your keep. You are now,
Yeah.
you know, but I think that like what happens to a lot of young men is they're in the laying in the ashes phase, and our system then they make mistakes that prevent them from ever being in a position to get any inertia behind them, right? Because they
Yeah.
fuck up a lot of stuff, and then it's like, well, your grades aren't that good, so you're not going to that good a school, and we're not pushing you towards trades, God knows, so you're not getting a useful skill, you don't have a master,
Yeah.
you're not an apprentice, so now you're at like a fucking D tier school. You're not that smart. You didn't try that hard academically anyway. So you're going to graduate and do some data entry. And now you got, 100K debt and you're fucked. So, like there needs to be something there where young men can make some mistakes and be kind of useless and then be ushered into productive manhood without, I don't know, just falling down all these fucking wormholes. Cause it seems like
Well,
right now they're
so
getting
like
stuck.
so I would say there's a few things, right? So obviously the school system is fucked. I blame socialism. You know, that just is what it is. I would say that, the school system, and this is again, women in power have instituted a system of school that is designed for women, right? It is not designed in any way, shape, or form for men, right? Every year we have less and less recess. Every year we have less and less hands-on learning experiences. And every year we have more and more be quiet, be demure, be feminine, take notes, use a highlighter with pretty colors to organize your notes, listen to the lectures. These are all feminine ways of learning. And the entire school system is designed to teach women and designed to leave men behind, boys behind. And if you don't fit into that system, then we'll pump you full of drugs and we'll call you ADHD. Many of them are, but many of them aren't, right? And we'll do whatever, or we'll use the stick, and we'll bring more and more police into the school. We'll create the school to prison pipeline. We'll do whatever we can to punish you, but we'll do nothing. We'll do nothing to foster your growth. And then of course we will create such a toxic socialist environment that we will bleed every masculine male role model out of that system, so there are only a couple of feminized liberal men and overwhelmingly women, so you have no role models and you have no people there that are capable of ushering in or giving good advice. Then, right, all of those things are a big problem in the school system. And so I would say that from a young age, that's a huge. I mean, like, I know when I talk to men, right? Um, Almost every guy that I know has like a favorite teacher, and it's almost always one dude in middle school or high school that like was the one fucking saving grace that like recognized how they were fucking up and was able to give them advice that was meaningful. And then from that, then be able to go in and like kind of fix things because they were lucky enough to find like one dude that was there, and it's devoid. It's all feminine, social reputation management and the stick. Secondly, when they go out into the world as young men, there is again a lot of stick and the wrong carrot. The lot of stick is we're going to steal all your money. We're going to tax the fuck out of you. We're
Mhm.
going to make it. We're going to have all of these. Like you cannot go out and get. And we're going to tax corporations and businesses so that they pay you less as well, right? And we're going to funnel wealth and money into assets because boomers love it when the only people that actually own houses get more and more money for their houses so that they can do a reverse mortgage and go on a bunch of cruises and then give their houses back to the banks when they retire, right? Like that just is what it is. I mean, it's obviously a generalization,
Mhm.
but I'm talking about generalizations in society. So that's again not a univariate analysis, not hashtag not all. But the other thing is we have the wrong carrot. And the wrong carrot is instead of having, this desire to go out and start a business, these opportunities to go out and create resources and wealth, we have the promise that if you fail, the government will take care of you. And there's nothing less conducive towards a man going out, a young man going out, than hopelessness of being able to achieve anything combined with a safety net for when they fail. Like, if you wanted to engineer a demasculated, unsuccessful, unproductive male population, take their wealth, funnel it to women, make it to where only if they're in the hyper 10% that they'll ever be able to have a girlfriend, that is actually like matched with them. Like, men can date, but they have to date down, right? They have to date women that have had tons of sexual partners, or they're single moms, or they don't take care of their bodies and they're very rude and they're very mean, right? Like your typical standard average in every way man does not get your typical standard average in every way woman. Instead, what they get is a bitter, broken woman that is resentful towards the fact that they're even in a relationship with them to some degree. And this is obviously, again, another generalization, right? Because especially for young men, there's a lot of young women that are dating up and they're all dating the same men that are hyper successful, hyper good looking, etc. And then all of those women are becoming bitter because none of those men will marry them or settle down with them. And then after a while, they become bitter towards men in general, etc. And now they have to go find a guy that makes less money than them, who maybe in their mind doesn't look as good as them. And that's what happens when you get rid of all of the things that women do by the government, so that women can then go enter the workforce. And then you have a fake email job economy where women do bullshit like work at a tech company and manage a bunch of software engineers, because they're the people person that works in HR or works in, team management, and they sit at a fucking pool and they make $80,000 a year, and they're managing a group of autistic dudes that all make fucking the same money they make, even though they're fucking doing the productive labor. And you wonder, like, well, what's going, like, you wonder, well, how do we fix this? There's only one fucking answer: get rid of all the socialism. And if we can't get rid of all the socialism, we have to get rid of public funding for schools. We have to get rid of social security. We have to get rid of all of these things,
or use it differently. I wonder, because one of the I have a weird perspective on this, because law, the nature of law is that there are more male lawyers than female lawyers on average. But I've certainly, because law is so cutthroat and you just don't really make partners unless they're making you money, right? It's just not a thing. Like, the women I know in my field don't, like, the story you're telling doesn't resonate with my field, but I also recognize my field is,
no, of course not.
my field's
Your
very
distinct.
distinct.
Your field selects for personality trait conscientiousness, because you have to go through
And aggressiveness,
that,
and
and it inserts right. It also selects for extroversion, and then most importantly, it selects for
honestly,
disagreeableness,
IQ,
which is a
disagreeableness, and
traditional.
IQ. Like, it's just you gotta learn a new thing really fast. That's most of what lawyers do. They learn
You're
something
correct.
really
I was
fast,
just
and then they
only
go yell
speaking in the
about it.
personality
Yeah,
domain, but also IQ,
yeah.
obviously, yes.
But so,
And women don't tend to be high IQ,
but
right?
but
Like, you
well,
don't get a lot of high IQ women. It doesn't happen.
I mean, I don't know what the bell curve looks like. I do know that in my life you do, but I again will say that my life is very
So
particular.
so
But
women are not low
but can we
IQ. Hold
back
on.
for 1 sec?
Variance.
Yeah,
Women tend
cluster
towards the
towards the
mean.
center. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
so there's more. So the further out, if your job is a low IQ field or a high IQ field, you'll see more men. If your
mhm.
job is a field that is like towards the center, then you'll see
Yeah.
more women.
It's a little bit misleading though, because law is high IQ, but it's specifically high verbal IQ. So it's, you're not gonna. It's not like engineering where you're gonna
It's
see
not
that
as it's
giant
yeah,
split.
it's not as big of a
Yeah.
difference,
But
correct?
the point I was going to make in earlier, that, as you were talking through this earlier, I referenced like plot armor. Like, what was my plot
Mhm.
armor? Part of my plot armor is that I had a lot of single sex education. I went to an all boys school for a period of time.
Mm, mm,
I
mm.
went to all boys summer camps where we did like outward bound shit, right? So it's like
Yeah, I would
you're around like
yeah, I would definitely
18-year-old
have that more of that.
boys who are like
Yeah.
trying to toughen you up a little bit. So one interesting that's happening now, it's kind of on its last legs in some ways, but the charter school experiment is an interesting idea. I wonder if there's like get trying to get charter school funding for single sex education would be
So
an
I am
interesting
against charter
project.
schools, but that is not typical of libertarians. I'm against charter schools because I'm less utopic. I'm just teasing you. Because I'm more black pilled than most people. And I've looked at the UN Sustainable Developmental Goals 2030, and I've looked at some of the people that are pushing charter schools and things like that. And my biggest fear with charter schools is that once government money goes to something, it becomes really, really, really easy for them to say that the voter needs to have a say in what is being done with that government money. And UN's Sustainable Developmental Goals 2030 talks specifically about charter schools and about then pushing in their ideas, mandating ideas within private institutions so that they can have more control, because it is a form of inequality and oppression. They don't use the term oppression, but inequality, to have private schools that are available to the higher class that affords them a better education. And so there is a big fear that, like, I like the concept of getting away from public school and going towards private school. I am terrified of government money being used for that, because that government money comes with strings attached. And what I'm afraid of is that we will lose what little freedom we have in private schools, Montessori schools, all of these alternate forms of education.
But
But let's say it's a perfect world.
there's been some
Yeah, go ahead.
interesting developments recently from the Supreme Court about, like, for example, parents' religious freedom and how that interacts with education.
Hmm. Parental
The
rights. Yeah.
yeah, parental rights, the ability to fund a religious school, and it might actually need to be done for that reason through a religious lens. But if I guess
Yeah, you have a lot more government protections if it's
yeah,
through
I
religion.
think the question would be, and this is almost more like a legal research question for me. It's like if I was trying to set up a charter school network that was
Hmm.
premised on single sex education. So you were having a girls' school, you're having the boys' school, you're having the events where they meet, but by and large they're separate. The way most single sex education is done.
Hmm.
Could you how could you massage, because this is what I do this as a lawyer, right?
I
How do
They
you
do this in New
massage the
York.
system to make you
They do this in New York.
do
So what you do is you target underprivileged boys,
Mhm.
right? You target low income underprivileged boys. If you're going to use charter school system where you're
Yeah,
utilizing state funds, and so they do this in New York, right? So it's like
that's where I taught.
you
Yeah.
cannot have, yeah, so you can't have over a certain level of like income, right? And then the cool thing about it is they have some of these in New York, and they actually outcompete the best private schools in all of New York City, because they are selective, and they're not selective based off of money; they're selective based off of behavior. And what this does is this engages the parent, because when you're a poor working class mom, single mom or something, right, and your son gets into a good school, and then the school says if he keeps doing this, he will be gone forever and he'll go back to New York City public schools. Guess what? I'm not saying it's good, but somebody gets their ass whooped. Somebody gets fucking, it's like someone gets straightened up in one way or another real fucking quick, and they behave. And it seems to be that one of the biggest components to lower socioeconomic status failures in education is less about the material and more about the behavior element. And so what you can do is you can target underprivileged people, and you're going to have to leave some people behind, right? But you can prove the success of all male schools and prove the success of pulling people out of poverty with hard work and different educational structures, by this domain. But the
And
problem is
here
that becomes an
here's
individual thing. Yeah, go ahead.
here's the twist,
I'm sure
right?
you know more about this than I do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like well, but you're paraphrasing pretty well. Like I think that you do see that. Like when I was teaching, and I did teach precisely in underprivileged areas with a lot of economic challenges, and by far the hardest families to work with were the ones that had been living in that neighborhood for generations, right? Because like that meant the inertia had set in. And like my school where I worked, we had like a lot of, for example, families that were Nigerian immigrants, and
Hmm.
the amount of effort and pride and work it took to get from Nigeria to here, let alone the fact that many of them were like doctors back in Nigeria and were like starting at the bottom here.
Yeah,
Those
it's brain
families
drain.
were incredible, but also they didn't stay at the school very long. They'd be incredibly successful, and then within 2 or 3 years, the parents had gotten a better job and they moved to a better neighborhood, right? So there's like, the there's that element to it. But the thing that is interesting to me about this thought experiment, let's say we could pull it off. What if the school was agnostic about college versus the trades? Meaning, like, as you get through middle school and high school, it's it's not putting a thumb on the scale. It's going to put as much effort into setting you up in a good apprenticeship as it would college prep. Like, there's we could talk about what the optionality is, but I think
Mhm.
that piece would be huge because I mean, people talk about like UBI because, all the data entry jobs are going to be gone. Well, you know what's not going to be gone? Plumbing, electrical work,
HVAC.
HVAC. These are going to be fucking boom times. So there does
And when
seem
you talk to men that at a young age are able to afford a house, it's not fucking dudes that went to college for 4 years. It's dudes that got at 18 and got an apprenticeship in HVAC or went to a trade school. And the reason is because they don't have fucking $80,000 in student debt and 4 years less in work experience. It's like, yeah, sure, you eventually made six figures and he only made 70, K. And it's like, cool, but he got a 4-year head start on you and he's got 70K less debt than you. And
well,
like people don't realize how often they're like, oh, they look at just salary at the height of a field and they go, oh, clearly lawyers make more money than plumbers. It's like, yes, lawyers on average make more money than plumbers, though there's a lot of lawyers in law school and lawyers positions are dwindling because a lot of companies are realizing it's easier to keep a few people on retainer and and hire like from within people that are essentially paralegals or working like insurance companies used to have a ton of lawyers, right? Now they just take people that have been working there for 10 years and then they put them in like level 4 position, and so they only need a lawyer under like extreme cases where they need a mediator, and even then that person's there and they're doing most of the work, right? So people are using AI and other means to get rid of lawyers because lawyers are expensive, so that they only need them when necessary. But nevertheless, even setting that aside, right? Like, yeah, sure. Maybe the average salary of a lawyer in your state is $90,000. Okay, well, are you going to be partner? No. Okay. Well, the average is a little fucked up by that now, isn't it? Right? Like, like that's a small select group of lawyers, right? A lot of lawyers are going to work at some government job or work for some corporation, or you know what I mean. Like most lawyers aren't going to be super wealthy people working in in the private, like
yeah.
with their own private practice or something, right? Like, or practice is not the right word, but you get what I mean.
Firm. Yeah, no, no. Look, I mean, like,
Firm.
there are some people who can go through this because law school is just a big sorting hat. There are some people who will go through the sorting hat and end up with like, the big firm jobs. And, I am in that category. So I'm not trying to like be an asshole about it, but it's not everybody. Like a lot of people go through law school and then don't get good jobs, right? Like that fucking happens too. So
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, like law school. I mean, obviously, there's elements to it, but I mean, just because you're really good at rote memorization doesn't mean that you're going to be successful in a law firm,
no.
right? Like these are two entirely different skills. You can get through law school and pass the bar, right? Predominantly just being good at rote memorization. Okay, you're conscientious, and okay, you have a high enough IQ to be able to do this. But even low IQ people can get through law school and pass the bar. I mean, maybe not low IQ, but average IQ
Yeah.
people can do that, right? But that doesn't mean that they're going to be successful when they're in a law firm and they're working fucking 80 hours somewhere as what I mean, like at a low level position, and they have to be combative and they have to fight and they have to be aggressive and they have to like fucking do even more than they did in law school. Like, yeah, people wash out.
Do you know why law school still works by and large? It's so funny too, because despite all the problems that we've talked about with law school, it actually still does its job very well, which is
Hmm.
sorting hats for law firms. That's its primary function. And
Yeah.
it works because at most schools, except for the top three, like Harvard, Stanford, Yale, have moved away from this because their brand is so strong, they don't have to do it anymore. but
That's also why their fucking LSAT and GRE scores
are
are fucking
plummeting.
trash
Yeah.
nowadays.
But in
Yeah,
if
like
you
the average fucking lawyer at Harvard is like a fucking not that much smarter than anybody else and that is going to
if
get any degree in a master's or PhD
if
program.
you're at a 1L program, you're getting hired off of your grades in your first year at
Mhm.
law school. Your grades in your first year are the only thing that you're going to have when you're applying for your summer internship. Your summer internship is going to hire you to be your job. That's so we're talking about like hundreds of thousands of dollars are on the line. Like this is a really big financial incentive. And then law
Mhm.
school exams are a fixed curve. The exam is 95% of your grade by and large, and the professor
Mhm.
just grades the paper, puts them in a row, and from best to worst, and says, top three are A pluses, the next one's five are A's, the next one's are A minuses. So you could write the best paper of your life. If it's not better than everybody else's, you're not doing that well. And
Right.
what does that mean? There's no logical cap to how hard you should be working in law school,
Mhm.
right? Like you, it literally, so
And remember, chat, no matter what it is, there's always an Asian that's better than you.
and they're going to be in your class, and they're going to be
Yeah.
and they're going to be studying their ass off. And if you want the job with the big salary, you need to get a good score, knowing that. So that part works. It teaches conscientiousness. It selects for it, and I think
Can I
that
just say something
there's
real quick while we're talking about this so
yeah.
people don't forget? Chat, there is a class in undergraduate, all right? This class has nothing to do with law. It has absolutely nothing to do with law, okay? It's biochemistry, biochem. Take this class if you want to be a lawyer or a doctor. If you struggle really hard to get an A in this class, being a lawyer or a doctor is probably not in the stars for you. And I'm just being honest. You might want to reevaluate your life goals. If you get an A in this class by studying relatively well and everything is okay, two things will happen. Number one, you'll know that you probably have what it takes to be a lawyer or a doctor. Number two, your grades on that class specifically is something that universities look at when they look at your transcripts because this is a notoriously hard undergraduate class and it is notoriously important for for medical doctors, not so much law schools, but nevertheless, they will look at that class and they'll go, oh, he got an A in biochem. He got a 99 in biochem. This person knows how to study. This person isn't a dummy. Like that is a very important class for people because I don't want people to get a fucking literature degree and apply to a law school and only get into a regular one and then get crushed and have this debt or these problems because you fucked up and failed. This is a great way to see if you're actually ready for it and one of many ways to get into a good school.
And just in general, like I think there's a lesson there too, which is one of the things we do that's kind of fucked up right now is that we treat undergrad like it's the time to find yourself. And it really, there should be a bunch of dudes laying in ashes, right? And then going to
Yeah.
a productive university setting when they're a few years older. Because, like,
Yeah.
the idea that you're paying $150,000 to be babysat and then graduate with a useless degree is ridiculous, especially because
Yeah.
there are other people at the university who are not treating it that way.
Yes.
They're out there fucking crushing it, and they're graduating with like a degree that gets them a job because they're kind of reverse engineering their life, and they're not looking at it like a
Or
discovery center.
or there are people that are in their freshman year that are doing everything they can to go take classes that are towards their degree program, not their introductory classes, and then they're going to their professor's office hours, and then they're saying, "I would really, really, really like to do a free internship, or really, really like to work in a research lab, so that when I apply to grad school, I've worked in a research lab for 2 years, and that way I can make connections with with professors at grad school." And then there are people that think, oh, if I get in the honor society and I make A's, And then they're like, how come I can't get into a good grad school? And it's because there was somebody in their first year that knew that they needed to be, that it takes a year or two to be able to even get into a research lab. And so you have to start when you first go there and hit the ground running so that they have that experience so they can build a working relationship with a professor that writes a raving review for them when they go to grad school and connect them with other people so that when they want to go to like, fucking whatever, like, whatever university they want to go to, they can go and sit and have lunch with a person that does research in the graduate degree program, and they've already got research experience, and then that guy wants them. And when that guy wants them, guess what? He asks for you. And that's how you end up getting into grad school. You don't get into grad school because you have good grades and a high GRE score. That's not how that fucking works. Sorry. They lie to you.
So I think
Law school's a little different, but
well,
like I'm just mean like in the social sciences
it's
and things.
changing. Unfortunately, they just took law school used to infamously have when you take the LSAT, they would have logical reasoning, reading comprehension, and the logic
Mhm.
games. They took the logic games off the LSAT recently, which is a huge fucking mistake. I used to teach the
What?
LSAT, and
It's a miniature IQ test.
well,
Like,
it's even better, right? It's both an IQ test, and because most law school students come from a literature or like a humanities background, it's not something that they're naturally good at. And if they're
mhm.
smart and they're conscientious, they can train themselves. So, you can, and that's exactly what you have to do in law school, which is you have to work really hard and learn new things and push yourself. So, you can do it with a humanities background, but it's tough. If you see like the
Yeah,
rare lawyers who come from like a math background, they all crush that because it's not it. If you have that background, it's not that hard. But
yeah.
I think removing that's going to be a huge mistake. Back in the day when I used to teach it, the LSAT was by far the highest correlated test. So your LSAT score was more correlated to your 1L grades than any test correlated to academic success on any level. It was
Mhm.
by far the best one. I think when they took that out, it's gonna be less good, is my guess. I think it's gonna start
Well,
deviating. And can you guess why it's being taken out? It's inequitable. That's
yeah,
that's the
it's
main.
racial disparities. Well, this is I talked about this with my sister because she wants to go to law school. And she's just going into her freshman year of college now. And everybody around her and her family was giving her shit advice because they don't know what they're talking about and they don't care. That's a whole nother story. But like I finally convinced her. I was like, get a chemistry degree, please. Like, don't get a chemistry degree. This is going to help you more than a fucking poli sci or literature degree. Those poli sci and literature degrees are a dime a fucking dozen for people trying applying to law school, and it's gonna help you way more. It's gonna prepare you way more when you do get to law school wherever you go, because it's a harder curriculum and it's a lot more math and science based. And honey, you're already reading like she's
Yeah.
already like she stole my John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, so that she could go read it. You know what I mean? Like she's already there on her own in terms of like that level of like political philosophy and things that she might get from a poli sci degree, right? She's already interested in that.
Mhm.
And so I was just like, dude, get a and she's doing it. And I'm proud of her and I'm happy for her. Cause like I was like, yes, I did something to hopefully set her up for success. Or maybe she'll drop out and that'll
Yeah.
be my bad.
No, I think coming from a science background, I mean, also not to be like hyper specific on this, but like the need for IP lawyers, specifically hard science IP lawyers, is like that's a very hard skill set to get. Somebody who's both
Mhm.
good in a hard science and a lawyer, so that those jobs are available. That is a
Well,
field
I
where you'll get some
also
work.
Yeah, well, I also have heard from a lot of people, and maybe I'm wrong, but I've spoken to some lawyers about it as well. And one of the reasons that when I was because I was trying to help my sister out, one of the reasons they suggested chemistry is similar to that, but also just like environmental lawyers, chemical companies, places that pay good money. You can't do that job with a poli sci degree and a law degree without having to teach yourself all without having a whole new thing to teach you. But having a chemistry degree, being able to do being able to do work, for or against cases of, let's say, the EPA or something,
Mhm.
right? having a good foundation in chemistry allows you to try cases that like other people would simply be like, fucking what? I have to go learn a lot to be able to understand what's going on here.
Yeah, no, no, it's definitely valuable when you have overlapping skills.
Somebody said it before you. STEM degrees also allow for patent law. so,
There you
so
go.
somebody saw I didn't check. I didn't check chat and tell,
Yeah.
but they knew what was up.
All right. So I think
We've hit a
it
lot.
sounds like if we wanted to get serious about combating socialism, the move would be to vote for deregulation and to
Mhm.
open a school for young boys, school for young girls, and try a single sex education model out and see where that goes. That seems like the
Well,
prescription I'm getting
we
from this
forgot.
call.
We also encourage young boys especially to get into productive martial arts.
Productive martial arts, that's a very good one. And then yeah, and then have some sort of like
Because there's
mechanism
a
where
lot
they
of
can
rituals.
see that they are productive. They can see that, like,
Exactly.
oh, if I do this, then
Hmm.
people are going to want me to keep helping. Like, I can be useful. I'm not, I don't have to be, because I mean, I think we've all remember this. I don't have to be this like fucking useless adolescent that nobody thinks is worth a shit forever. Like, there's a next
Right.
step.
Yep. So productive martial arts, maybe some all boys charter schools, and I focus a lot on deregulation and philosophy, teaching the philosophy.
Yeah.
Like because it's a pay it forward kind of thing, right? You can make one philosopher, and then that philosopher makes make three philosopher, and then what happens if three philosophers make three philosophers, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera.
And then for someone, with my skill set, the trick is going to be how do you massage the system to let you do any of this shit? But that is what I do for a living. So that is something I could figure out. So that's not outside the realm of
If you
possibility.
let me know when you're making a little bit more content, right? Because I looked at your YouTube channel, you don't have a lot there, but it looks like you're setting yourself up to start doing that, right?
Yeah, yeah. I set up the YouTube channel because at one point I was talking to Wick and he's like, it's incredibly stupid for you to come on my show like once a week and not record anything. Like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm trying to kind of like focus on that. It's a hobby. It's not how I make my money. It's not where,
Oh,
but,
for
but
sure, for
I
sure.
am trying
I'm
to
saying
build it
if you
out for sure.
I'm just saying stay in contact with me,
Mhm.
right? Once you get it a little bit more or whatever, I've been able to do it twice now where I've gotten people connected with this, right? And so like once you've kind of got yourself a little bit established and that's like this is the kind of thing and you figured out the kinks, right? So you don't have fucked up audio or weird cuts. You know what I mean? Like once you kind of figured out what you're doing. I don't really care about your subscriber count, right? I'm just saying once you kind of figured out how to manage your YouTube channel and figure those things out, contact me again. I'll put you into contact with Stefan Kinsella. I think you two would have a great conversation, right? Talking to an anarcho-capitalist theorist who's also an IP lawyer. He loves having conversations like that and maybe being able to have some of those natural rights conversations where you both are discussing things from a law background. I think that would be an amazing. I'd watch that, right? Like I'd 100% watch that content. But I just don't want to like be like Seth and talk to this guy when you're like still kind of in the hobby phase and your audio isn't quite figured out and stuff like that. But get that cleaned up and I'll definitely like I'll just bother the shit out of him,
Awesome, man.
and then he'll do it.
I appreciate that. I'm transparent that this is absolutely a work in progress, and I'm hoping that I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
get
yeah.
better at it. But it's one step at a fucking time.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, you will eventually, even as a hobby, kind of figure out how to not like, make your UI not look trash and figure out your search engine optimization and like all these little things that you just kind of pick up along the way, you'll pick up. And then once you got all that kind of figured out and you're like, oh, I can make a good video like that. Like, boom, I know how to put together a video, edit it and make it look good and like make sure the thumbnail is correct. Cause I notice your videos don't have thumbnails and shit. Like once you figure out kind of the game a little bit, like definitely DM me. I'll do everything I can to make that happen because I think that would be a wonderful conversation. I just don't want it to go nowhere because like it has no thumbnail and like you're not sure like what you know what I mean. Like I just don't want it to get like 80 views and just kind of sit somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. No, no, I appreciate the offer, and it is. I think it's trending that direction. We'll see, but it's one step at a time.
Yeah.
Candidly, in just since we're talking about this, it is a near certainty I'm going to have to like solve some of these problems with money because there's just with the way I work professionally, I will not be able to do all these things. So if anybody is an editor and is interested, that is something that I would be interested in having a conversation. Hit me up. We can chat.
Yeah, hit him up in the Discord if you have editing experience. And then after you're done with that, why don't you fucking tell me why you haven't hit me up? I don't have an editor. He probably has more money than me, so that's fair. He's watched me make $82 in a 5-hour stream. So, my finances are laid bare before you tread softly, for you tread on my dreams.
The war chest is filling up. That's the important
Yeah,
thing.
there you go.
And I will not mention what I bill for 5 hours of my time. So we
Oh,
can.
good God. All right, Ryan. I had a wonderful conversation. Went way longer than I expected. Keep in touch. Maybe we'll chat about specific things at a later time, or or whatever. We'll have some fun together. I know you're a busy man, I'm sure, and tonight was an oddity, but I appreciate it nonetheless.
No, this was a fantastic conversation. I appreciate it and look forward to more of them. Have a good one, buddy.
Peace.